Welcome back to another story on Arcane Paradox. This time, we're bringing you, what if Fleur's Veela grandmother sensed Harry's true aura at Triwizard weigh-in and declared him lost Veela Emperor to entire Britain. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Weight of Old Magic. The wand weighing ceremony was supposed to be boring. That was the consensus among the students who'd watched the champions file into the small antechamber off the Great Hall, a narrow, wood-paneled room that smelled of old parchment and furniture polish, crammed with too many important people and not nearly enough chairs. Reporters from the Daily Prophet jostled for position near the door. Dumbledore stood at the far end looking serene in robes the color of a bruised plum. Ludo Bagman was already talking, filling the silence with commentary nobody had asked for. Mr. Ollivander had arranged his tools on a velvet cloth with the focused care of a surgeon, his pale eyes drifting occasionally to the champions as they settled in. Cedric Diggory stood straight and composed, the way people stand when they've been told all their lives that composure is a virtue. Victor Crumb had folded himself into a chair in the corner and radiated the particular stillness of someone who was famous enough to have stopped caring about rooms full of people staring at him. Fleur Delacour stood apart from everyone, her silver blonde hair catching the lamplight, her expression somewhere between bored and quietly contemptuous in the manner of someone who had grown up beautiful and had learned very early that most rooms were not worth her full attention. Harry Potter stood near the door and wished he were somewhere else. Specifically, he wished he were in the dormitory. Or the Quidditch pitch. Or a moderately interesting ditch somewhere in Scotland. Anywhere, really, that wasn't here, with Rita Skeeter circling him like a well-dressed shark, her quick quotes scratching furiously in her notebook even when nobody was speaking. Harry, she said, for what felt like the 14th time, her voice honey-sweet and professionally warm. Just a moment of your time. The Prophet readership is dying to know, how does it feel, being the youngest champion selected in Triwizard history? Some are saying the goblet chose you specifically because the magical need of the tournament required someone of your particular. I didn't put my name in, Harry said. Of course, of course. She smiled in the particular way people smile when they have absolutely no intention of writing what you've just told them. But here you are nonetheless. Fate is a funny thing, isn't it? Harry didn't answer. He was watching the door. Something had changed in the corridor outside. He couldn't explain how he knew, it was less a sound than a shift in the quality of the air, the way pressure changes before a storm rolls in. The lamplight in the room seemed to settle, to become more deliberate somehow, like everything had just decided to behave itself. The door opened. She came in last, behind the cluster of Beauxbatons professors who'd accompanied the champions to the ceremony, and at first Harry didn't notice her because she was not tall, compact, actually, the kind of small that takes up space in a completely different way than height does. She was old. That was the first word that came to mind and felt inadequate the moment it arrived. Not elderly, not frail, not stooped. Old the way mountains are old. Old the way certain silences are old. Her hair was white and worn loose over her shoulders, and her face was lined with something that wasn't just time, it was accumulation, a whole geological strata of experience and memory and something else that Harry couldn't name. She was Fleur's grandmother, though Harry didn't know that yet. What he knew was that the moment she stepped into the room, Fleur stood up straighter. Victor Crumb, who hadn't reacted to anything since he'd arrived, looked up. Even Rita Skeeter's quill paused. Dumbledore's expression didn't change, but something moved behind his eyes. He said, quietly, Evangeline, and put a great deal into the single word, recognition, respect, and perhaps the faintest trace of wariness. Albus. Her voice was low and accented, French vowels shaped by something older underneath. She looked around the room in a single, comprehensive sweep, the way a chess player looks at a board, cataloging everything before moving anything. Her eyes passed over Cedric. Passed over Crumb. Paused on Fleur with an expression of profound, complicated love. Then they found Harry. They stopped. Harry had been looked at in a great many ways over his 14 years. He'd been looked at with awe, with pity, with resentment, with calculation, with the starry-eyed reverence that people directed at the scar rather than the person wearing it. He'd been looked at by Voldemort, which was an experience in a category entirely its own. But no one had ever looked at him the way this woman did, as though she were seeing something underneath him, or perhaps behind him, or perhaps threaded through him like light through old glass. Her face went absolutely still. For a long moment, nothing happened. The room continued its low murmur of conversation. Ollivander was saying something to Madame Maxime about wand flexibility. Rita's quill started moving again. The world went on being ordinary. Then Evangeline Delacour crossed the room. She walked directly to Harry with the unhurried certainty of someone who has never had to navigate around other people's comfort, who has simply always trusted that paths would open because paths had always opened. People moved without realizing they were moving. Rita stepped sideways. A Beauxbatons professor shifted left. Even Dumbledore, who was not a man who yielded ground easily, took a single step to the side. She stopped in front of Harry. Up close, her eyes were extraordinary, the pale, luminous gold of a winter moon, with a quality of depth to them that made Harry feel briefly and not unpleasantly like he was looking down through very clear water at something ancient at the bottom. "Give me your hand," she said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even really a command. It was just the statement of what was going to happen next. Harry, who had faced dark wizards and dementors and a murderous basilisk and hadn't flinched at any of them, found himself holding out his hand. Her fingers closed around his wrist, not his hand. She held it the way a doctor takes a pulse, 2 fingers pressed lightly over the inside of his wrist, and she closed her eyes. The room had gone quiet. Harry didn't know when that had happened. Evangeline's brow furrowed, very slightly. Then it smoothed. Then, slowly, she opened her eyes, and she looked at him with an expression that was equal parts wonder and grief and something fierce and almost angry, and she said, not quietly, not to anyone in particular, but to the room itself, in a voice that carried without effort, "L'Empereur." Silence. Then, in English, in the same carrying voice, "The Emperor's blood. I know this aura. I know this thread." She had not released his wrist. Her gold eyes didn't leave his face. 300 years. 300 years since the last one walked, and here you stand in a school corridor with your grandfather's fire in your veins and nobody, her voice caught, just slightly, on something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite sorrow. Nobody told you. Grandmere. Fleur's voice, sharp and low, crossed the room like a thrown knife. She was moving toward them, her composure cracked open just enough to show the alarm underneath. "What are you, Fleur?" Evangeline didn't look away from Harry. "I see what I see." "What," said Harry, with genuine calmness that surprised everyone including himself, "is an emperor?" Dumbledore said, "Perhaps this is a conversation better suited to, no." Harry wasn't rude about it. He was just clear. He looked at the old woman who was still holding his wrist and hadn't moved and looked like she would stand there for another 300 years if necessary. "What is an emperor?" Evangeline finally released his wrist. She stepped back half a pace, not from deference but to see him better, the way an artist steps back from a canvas. She looked at him for a long moment, at his face, his build, the quality of stillness in him that most people catalogued as quiet but she was reading as something else entirely. "Among the Veela," she said, and her voice had changed, it had the quality of something being spoken that had been held in careful silence for a very long time, "there are bloodlines, and there are bloodlines. The common ones carry beauty, fire, the allure, what the wizarding world knows. But at the foundation, before the bloodlines fractured and scattered into the winds of history, there was one line that carried everything. Not just fire. The full scope. Storm and song and the ability to see the true nature of any living thing." She paused. The Emperor line. It could not be separated from the Veela, but it could appear in any body, any descent, any child who carried so much as a thread of the original fire. And when it appeared, all Veela, all of them, every colony, every bloodline, recognized it as sovereign. "That's a myth," said one of the Beauxbatons professors, a tall woman with dark hair and sharp features. "Not unkindly, academically, the way people dispute things they've been taught in classrooms." "I know what I am reading," Evangeline said, and the professor went quiet. "His mother," said Fleur, who had come to stand beside her grandmother and was staring at Harry with an expression he couldn't decipher. "Lily Potter was, half Veela, at minimum. Possibly more." Evangeline's eyes hadn't left Harry. "The Evans line. The fire was dormant. Dormant for generations, perhaps, hiding inside a wizarding bloodline like an ember in ash. But it did not go out." The ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile crossed her face. "It never goes out." "Right," said Rita Skeeter, and her quill was flying now, scratching so fast it was leaving ink marks up her own arm. "So what you're saying, for the record, is that Harry Potter is not simply a wizard champion or a boy who lived, but is in fact the lost Veela Emperor," Evangeline said, simply and completely without drama, "the way you state a fact you have known for a long time and are finally being asked to say aloud. Heir to the oldest sovereign line in our history. Recognized by Veela law, which predates ministry law, Wisengamot law, and every charter of magical governance ever written on this island, as sovereign over every Veela colony and their affiliated clans on this continent." The room erupted. Harry stood in the middle of it and felt strangely calm. It wasn't the numbness of shock, he'd been shocked before and it felt nothing like this. This was something else. This was the feeling of a puzzle piece that had been missing for so long you'd stopped noticing the gap, suddenly, without warning, snapping into place. He thought about things that had never made sense, the way fire never seemed to alarm him the way it alarmed other people, the quality of attention he got from magical creatures that went beyond what Parseltongue could explain, the way he sometimes felt, in moments of danger, not fear but something that rose in him like a tide, ancient and enormous and completely his own. He looked at his hand. Turned it over. Looked at the inside of his wrist where Evangeline's fingers had been. Nothing visible. But something, under the skin, felt like it was listening. "Mr. Potter." Dumbledore's voice, carefully measured, cut through the chaos. He was looking at Harry with blue eyes that were doing a great deal of very rapid, very private thinking. "Why don't we, Headmaster?" Harry looked up. "With respect, I'd like to finish this conversation first." Dumbledore blinked. In 15 years of teaching, navigating, and gently managing Harry Potter's world, Harry had never once interrupted him with that particular tone. Calm. Settled. Absolute. He said, after a moment, "Of course." Harry turned back to Evangeline. "You said sovereign over Veela colonies. What does that actually mean?" "Practically. It means," Evangeline said, and there was a quality of profound satisfaction in her voice that Harry suspected had been a long time in the earning, "that by our oldest laws, you hold authority over every matter pertaining to Veela welfare, recognition, and protection. It means the Ministry of Magic has no jurisdiction over any Veela-affiliated dispute that you choose to rule upon. It means," she glanced at the door, through which the sound of the corridor beyond had changed in pitch, acquiring the sharp quality of news traveling fast. "It means that every colony on the continent already knows. They will feel it. They felt it the moment I touched your wrist and my recognition activated the declaration." Harry absorbed this. They felt it. All of them. Yes. And they'll, what? Come here. The elders will send representatives. Within days. She looked at him steadily. You did not ask for this. No. And you are not frightened. It wasn't quite a question. He answered it anyway. I've been frightened, Harry said. This isn't what that feels like. Something moved in Evangeline's gold eyes. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she did something nobody in the room expected, she inclined her head. Slightly, precisely, with enormous dignity. Not a bow. Something more specific than a bow. An acknowledgement. Fleur's breath caught. Now, said Rita Skeeter, with the barely suppressed glee of someone who has just watched their entire professional life's worth of front-page stories fall into their lap at once, if I could just get a quote, you will write what you witnessed accurately, Harry told her, and his voice hadn't changed in volume or temperature, but something in it made Rita's quill pause mid-stroke, or I will remember this conversation when it becomes relevant. He looked at her with the same directness he'd used on Dumbledore, and on Evangeline, and that would shortly, he suspected, become a habit. I think that's fair. Rita Skeeter, for the first time in her professional career, wrote exactly what had happened. Ollivander, who had remained motionless at his velvet-covered table through the entire scene, let out a long, slow breath and said, to no one in particular, well. That explains some things about the phoenix feather. Nobody heard him. But he smiled at the table, privately and with deep satisfaction, and began quietly repacking his tools. The wand examination proceeded, eventually. Cedric's wand was checked and found to be in excellent condition, maple and unicorn hair, 9.5 inches, flexible. Crumb's wand, a thick Gregorovitch make, dense with dark wood, was measured and noted. Fleur's was examined, willow and Veela hair, 9.25 inches, and Ollivander spent an extra moment holding it with the expression of a man reviewing old correspondence. When Harry's holly wand was placed in Ollivander's hands, the old wand-maker held it very quietly for a moment with his eyes closed, and then he looked at Harry with his unsettling, lamp-like gaze and said, simply, 11 inches. Holly. Phoenix feather core from a bird who has never since given another feather. He paused. The brother wand, as you know, belongs to he who must not be named. I know, Harry said. What you may not know, Ollivander said, turning the wand in his fingers with gentle precision, is that phoenix feather is, among all wand cores, uniquely sensitive to what the wand-makers call sovereign fire. The core of a phoenix, which bows to no living thing, will only sit in perfect harmony with a witch or wizard whose own fire is, how to put it, he tilted his head. Self-authorizing. Not trained, not gifted, not inherited in the traditional sense. Simply native. He held the wand out. It has always been an exceptionally good wand, Mr. Potter. It seems we now know precisely why. Harry took the wand back. He held it and felt the familiar warmth of it settle into his palm, and this time he thought he understood something about that warmth that he hadn't before, not the wand recognizing him, but both of them recognizing something that had always been true about him. Across the room, Fleur was watching him. She had watched him through the whole examination with the particular focused attention of someone recalibrating rapidly. Fleur had a gift for reading people, it was Veela-born, partly, but also earned through years of being the most conspicuous person in any room and learning to read rooms the way other people read books. She had come to Britain with a clear understanding of Harry Potter, a small boy who'd stumbled into fame he didn't understand, riding on the sympathy of a dead mother and a scar that had become its own brand. She had been wrong. She was beginning to understand just how completely she had been wrong, and she was not, despite what people often assumed about her, based on her face and her bloodline and her tendency toward elegant cruelty with words, she was not too proud to acknowledge it. She watched him take his wand back from Ollivander and say something quiet to the old man that made the wand-maker laugh, genuinely laugh, in the way of someone who rarely laughs and means it when they do. She looked at her grandmother, who was watching Harry with an expression Fleur had only ever seen on Evangeline's face during moments of profound historical significance, wars, births, deaths, the times when the old woman seemed to step briefly out of the present and into some longer view of time that only she could access. Grandmère, Fleur said, quietly, in French. Is this certain? You are absolutely certain. Evangeline turned to look at her granddaughter, and her gold eyes were warm and terrible at once, the way old fires are when you look directly into them. Ma petite, she said. I have waited 30 years to feel that aura. I was beginning to believe the line was truly gone. She glanced back at Harry, who was now fielding a barrage of questions from 3 different journalists with the calm economy of someone who had learned very young to give the minimum necessary information. It is not gone. It is very much here. And it is, she paused, and what crossed her face was something close to amusement. Completely unmanageable. That is not reassuring, Fleur said. No, her grandmother agreed, fondly. But it is appropriate. By the time the ceremony ended, the news had escaped the room. Gossip in a school the size of Hogwarts travels at roughly the speed of light when properly motivated, and Veela Emperor was the kind of phrase that motivated. In the corridor outside the Great Hall, Harry could hear the change in sound, the shift in register that meant a lot of people were saying his name at once. He walked out of the ceremony room with Hermione and Ron, who'd been waiting in the corridor with the barely contained intensity of two people who'd heard muffled shouting and were vibrating with the need for information. What happened in there? Ron demanded, the moment the door opened. There was shouting and we heard, something about an emperor. Is that a tournament thing? A new title? Are there titles now? Sort of, Harry said. Sort of. It's complicated. Harry. Hermione had her research voice on, the one that meant she'd already started sorting the implications into categories. Her eyes were bright and slightly alarmed. If what we heard through the door is accurate, if Madame Evangeline Delacour actually declared you a Veela Emperor in front of witnesses, including a prophet reporter, she did. Then there are going to be consequences, Harry agreed. Yeah. I know. He looked at the corridor ahead, where students were already beginning to part as they noticed him coming, some with the familiar odd and reverent expressions he'd never gotten used to, but others with something different now, a kind of uncertain deference, as though they weren't sure which category to put him in anymore. I think that might be okay. Ron and Hermione exchanged a look over his head. He's very calm, Ron said. I noticed, Hermione said. Should he be that calm? I don't know, Hermione said, and turned to watch Harry, who had stopped to answer a second-year's stuttered question with complete patience and an actual smile. But I think it might be real. Harry looked back at the door behind them. Through the window's glass panel, he could see the ceremony room, could see Dumbledore in deep, quiet conversation with a Beauxbatons official, both of them wearing the expressions of people revising their plans. Could see Ollivander, who had finished packing and was standing alone near the window, looking out at nothing, or perhaps something very far away. Could see, last of all, Fleur Delacour, who was still standing exactly where he'd last seen her, and who was still watching the door through which he'd just left. Their eyes met through the glass. He nodded, not the greeting of someone being gracious, but the recognition of someone acknowledging something seen, and turned back to his friends. Come on, he said. I'll explain on the way to dinner. You're going to want to be sitting down. Why? Ron asked. Because Hermione is going to have a lot of follow-up questions, and it's going to take a while. Hermione, despite everything, laughed. And behind them, unseen, Evangeline Delacour watched Harry Potter walk down the corridor of a Scottish castle, surrounded by his friends, utterly unhurried, and she felt something that was older than her own considerable years, a quality of rightness, of a thing long missing returning to its proper place, settle into her bones like warmth. L'Empereur, she said again, under her breath. To no one. To memory. To the long line of women in her family who had told stories about this bloodline to children who'd grown up thinking they were only stories. She hoped they could hear her. She suspected they could. Dinner that night was louder than any previous dinner since the start of term, and that was including the night the goblet had spat out Harry's name. The Great Hall had the electric, supercharged atmosphere of a place where an enormous piece of information is being rapidly processed by 400 people simultaneously and very few of them are reaching the same conclusion. Harry sat between Ron and Hermione at the Gryffindor table and ate his shepherd's pie and answered questions until he was tired of his own voice, and then stopped answering questions and just ate, which the people around him eventually accepted, because there was something about the quality of Harry's not answering that made you feel, somehow, that the conversation was over. The Emperor thing, Ron said finally, in a low voice, because he'd been sitting on it all through dinner and Ron had never been able to sit on anything for very long. What Evangeline said about your mum. Lily Potter being part Veela. Yeah, Harry said. Did you have any idea? Before today. Harry considered the question seriously, the way he was finding himself considering most things today, carefully, unhurried, from the inside out. I had things that didn't fit, he said. I never knew what to do with them. Now I do. Ron absorbed this. He looked like he wanted to say something else, several things else, but he was watching Harry's face and something he saw there suggested that this was, for now, all he was going to get. He went back to his food. Hermione, who had a copy of Veela, Heritage, History, and Magical Taxonomy open on the table between her plate and her glass, she had retrieved it from the library between the ceremony and dinner in the time it would have taken most people to walk to the library, was reading with one hand and eating with the other, and she said, without looking up, according to this, the last confirmed Emperor sighting was 1693. During the Salem witch trials, actually. There were reports of a figure who the colonists couldn't, well, it's not important right now. The point is, she finally looked up, and her expression had the quality of someone who has found their way to the edge of something very large and is measuring the distance down. Harry, if this is real, and I have no reason to think Madame Evangeline Delacour is mistaken about something this significant, the implications for your legal standing are extraordinary. Veela's sovereign law is one of the only preministry legal frameworks still recognized by the ICW as having, Hermione, Harry said. Yes. Can you research it tonight and tell me the important bits in the morning? I'm still processing the shepherd's pie. She blinked. Then she smiled, small and genuine, the one that came out when she'd been reminded that knowledge was supposed to be in service of people rather than the other way around. Yes, she said. I can do that. Across the hall, at the Beauxbatons table, or the end of the Ravenclaw table that Beauxbatons students had claimed, Fleur sat with her schoolmates and didn't eat much. Didn't speak much. The other Beauxbatons girls were full of excitement and theories in each other's company, but Fleur was somewhere else entirely. She was thinking about the moment Harry had looked at her grandmother and asked, in that completely level voice, "What is an emperor?" Not "Who am I?" she noted. Not "What does this mean for me?" Not even "What do you want from me?" Just, "What is an emperor?" A question about the thing itself, the definition, the shape of it. He'd wanted to understand it before he decided how to feel about it. It was, she thought, a remarkably adult thing to do. And he was 14. She picked up her fork and put it down again. Fleur, said Amélie, her closest friend among the Beauxbatons girls, leaning in with wide eyes. Is it true? Is he actually? Yes, Fleur said. But he's so, Amélie gestured vaguely. Small. He is not particularly small, Fleur said, with slightly more edge than she'd intended. Amélie blinked at her. Then, slowly, an extremely knowing smile spread across her face. Fleur Isabelle Delacour, she said. Stop, Fleur said. Stop, Fleur said, and picked up her fork, and did not look at the Gryffindor table, and absolutely did not notice whether Harry was sitting there still or had gone, and was not thinking about gold-warm eyes and a hand held steady for examination and a voice that had somehow managed to make that is fair sound like a declaration. She was not thinking about any of that. The shepherd's pie at the staff table went mostly untouched. Dumbledore had excused himself before the first course arrived, which he rarely did. In his office, seated in the high-backed chair behind his desk, surrounded by the soft sounds of sleeping portraits and turning instruments, he sat with his fingers pressed together and thought for a very long time. He was not alarmed. Alarm was not precisely the right word. He was recalibrating. In the way that a man recalibrates when he realizes the map he's been navigating from is not wrong, exactly, but was drawn at a different scale than the territory. Fawkes, he said, after a while. The phoenix stirred on his perch, opened one golden eye, and regarded him. Did you know? Dumbledore asked. Fawkes regarded him for another moment, then closed his eye and tucked his head back under his wing with the serene indifference of a creature who finds the question unanswerable in any language currently available to humans. "Quite," said Dumbledore. He reached for a quill, and a piece of parchment, and began to write. In a different wing of the castle, in the guest quarters assigned to the Beauxbatons delegation, Evangeline Delacour sat in a chair by the window and looked out at the grounds, where the lake lay black and depthless under a sky full of stars, and felt old in the best possible way, full rather than empty, like a vessel that has been put to its proper use at last. She reached into the pocket of her robe and took out a small glass vial, sealed with wax the color of old amber. Inside, a single thread of light coiled and shifted like something breathing. The vial was very old. The light inside was older. "Enfin," she said, at last, to the light, and to the memory of her mother who had given it to her, and her mother's mother before that, down a chain of careful hands and long waiting. Finally. The light in the vial brightened, briefly, as if it hurt her. Outside, across the dark grounds, Hogwarts Castle rose against the stars, and somewhere inside it, a 14-year-old boy with fire in his blood and a phoenix feather wand and a great deal still to learn was lying awake in his four-poster bed, staring at the ceiling, turning the inside of his wrist over in the dark and feeling something there, quiet and steady and deep as bedrock. Not a spell. Not a curse. Not a scar. His. He closed his eyes. He slept easily, the way people sleep when something that has been out of alignment for a long time has just clicked, quietly and completely, back to where it belongs. Chapter 2, Wildfire. Harry woke up to Ron staring at him. Not the casual, half-asleep staring of someone who happened to be awake at the same time. The focused, wide-awake, sitting up in bed staring of someone who had been doing it for a while and had questions stacking up behind his eyes like traffic on the M1. "Morning," Harry said. "The Prophet is here," Ron said. Harry sat up. "Already?" "Front page." Ron held up the paper. The headline was large enough to read from across the room, which Harry suspected was intentional. "Potter, Veela Emperor. Ancient bloodline surfaces at Triwizard ceremony. Exclusive coverage by Rita Skeeter." Below it, a photograph. Harry in the ceremony room, standing very still while Evangeline held his wrist, and even in moving newspaper print the quality of that moment was unmistakable, the stillness of it, the gravity. The photograph. Harry looked, against all probability, completely composed. Certain. Like someone who'd been told a large and complicated truth and had simply decided to believe it. Harry stared at his own photograph for a moment. Then he reached for his glasses. "It's not bad," Ron said, carefully. "The article. She actually wrote what happened. Which is, I mean, Rita Skeeter writing something accurate is a bit like Snape complimenting your potion. Technically possible, but you'd want to check for hexes first." Harry read it. Rita had, in fact, reported the events with unusual fidelity, the ceremony, Evangeline's reading, the declaration, the exact words used. The tone was breathless and the adjectives were doing significant work, but the facts were present and largely undistorted. There were 2 paragraphs of speculation toward the end about what an emperor designation might mean for the ministry, and a quote from a senior Wisengamot official who wished to remain anonymous, saying the claim required thorough investigation and verification before any legal weight could be attributed to it. Harry folded the paper and set it on his nightstand with the quiet precision of someone filing a document. "She wrote what she saw," he said. "I told her to." Ron looked at him sideways. "You told Rita Skeeter to write accurately?" "Yes." "And she did?" "Yes." Ron opened his mouth, closed it, and then said, with the air of someone making peace with something large, "Right. Okay. I'm going to have breakfast." Hermione was already at the table when they came down, Veela, Heritage, History, and Magical Taxonomy replaced by 3 different books and a scroll of notes that unrolled halfway across the table when she spread it out. She looked like she hadn't slept much, but the look on her face was the opposite of tired. it was the particular bright-eyed energy she got when she'd spent the night running at full intellectual speed and had found something genuinely extraordinary at the end of the track. "Sit down," she said, "because there's a lot." Harry sat. He poured himself tea. He looked at the scroll. "Legal standing first," Hermione said, tapping the scroll. "The Veela Sovereign Accords of 1192, which predate the International Statute of Secrecy by nearly 5 centuries, established the Emperor bloodline as having supreme juridical authority over all Veela matters across Europe. And here's the critical part," she pointed to a passage she'd copied out in precise, underlined letters. "The ICW's foundational charter, written in 1689, explicitly preserved all pre-existing sovereign magical claims rather than superseding them. Which means the Veela Sovereign Accords are still technically active law." "Technically," Harry said. "Well, nobody's enforced them in 300 years because everyone assumed the Emperor line was extinct. But they were never repealed. They're just dormant. Like the line itself." Harry looked at the passage. "So if the claim is recognized, the Ministry has no jurisdiction over any matter you choose to claim authority on, under Veela law. Which is broad. Much broader than I expected." Hermione hesitated, and then said, in the careful voice she used when she was delivering something that surprised even her. "Harry, the historical record of what emperors actually did is fragmentary, but the pattern is consistent. They didn't rule the way kings rule. They served as arbiters. Protectors. There's a Latin term in the older texts, custos ignis veri. Guardian of true fire. The role was essentially to protect Veela from persecution, to mediate intercolony disputes, and to," she paused on the last line of her notes, "to stand between magical peoples and the political structures that tried to erase them." Silence. Ron had stopped eating. He was reading over Harry's shoulder with his mouth slightly open. "That's," Ron started. "Yeah," Harry said. "That's basically what you, Ron. I'm just saying. It's a bit on the nose, isn't it? The orphan who fights the Dark Lord his whole life turns out to also be the ancient guardian of magical peoples." "That's," Ron gestured. "That's very, don't say it," Harry said. "Destiny," Ron said. Harry gave him a long-suffering look. Hermione, despite everything, nearly choked on her orange juice. The hall was filling up around them now, the morning energy of the school settling into its usual patterns, but with a different quality today, an additional current running through the usual conversations, like electricity in a wire. People were looking at Harry more than usual, and in more different ways than usual. Some with the familiar reverence and pity blend. Some with a new careful deference that sat uncomfortably, as though they were revising their mental category for him in real time and hadn't found the right one yet. A few Slytherins, Draco Malfoy prominent among them, were watching with the tight expressions of people who'd received news that complicated their worldview and were not happy about the complication. Draco caught Harry's eye across the hall, and something interesting crossed his face, not the usual contempt, but something more calculating and genuinely uncertain. He looked away first. Harry noticed. Filed it. Went back to his eggs. Professor McGonagall appeared at his shoulder with the brisk purposefulness of someone executing a mission. "Potter. The headmaster would like to see you after breakfast." "All right," Harry said. She lingered, which was not typical of McGonagall, who treated lingering as a form of inefficiency. He looked up at her. Her expression was doing several things at once, the professional composure she always wore, and underneath it something else, a quality of, not surprise, exactly, but a deep, personal reassessment happening quietly behind her eyes. "The article this morning," she said. "I read it. It will have reached the Ministry by now." "I'd expect so." McGonagall looked at him for a moment with that reassessing quality running full and open in her eyes, and then said, quite quietly, "Your mother had something." She stopped. Seemed to decide the sentence was finished in a way she hadn't intended, and then said, "She was a remarkable witch. In ways that went beyond what most people understood." Harry held very still. McGonagall had known his mother. Directly, personally, they'd overlapped at Hogwarts, teacher and student. Information about Lily Potter, offered directly and personally, was rare enough to be precious. "What kind of ways?" he asked. McGonagall pressed her lips together briefly. "Ways that make rather more sense to me this morning than they did yesterday." She straightened, reassuming her professional armor. "After breakfast. Headmaster's office." And she moved on. Harry looked at the table. Then at his hands. Ron said, gently, "You okay?" "Yes," Harry said. It was true, which still surprised him slightly. "I want to know more about her." "We'll find it," Hermione said immediately, with the conviction of someone making a promise. "Whatever there is to find, we'll find it." Harry nodded, and felt the warmth of them, of these two specific people who had shown up and kept showing up, and ate the rest of his breakfast with the grounded, clear-eyed calm that had apparently decided to take up permanent residence in him overnight. The Beauxbatons students arrived for breakfast as Harry was finishing, filing in with the particular elegant efficiency of people trained to enter rooms well. Fleur came in near the back of the group, already in conversation with a taller girl, and Harry watched her without trying to be subtle about it because subtlety about where you're looking had always struck him as a somewhat pointless exercise. She glanced over and caught him watching, and for a moment they both simply acknowledged the fact, and then she turned back to her conversation, and Harry thought there was something different in her posture now compared to yesterday, something that wasn't the cool, slightly pointed distance she'd maintained since her arrival. Not warmth, exactly. More like, a door that had been locked was now simply closed. Progress, he thought, though he couldn't have said why it felt like progress specifically, or why that mattered to him in particular. He gathered his things and headed for Dumbledore's office. The gargoyle moved aside before he said the password, which was either a standing instruction or a form of respect from a stone creature that had apparently gotten the news. Harry decided not to think about that too hard and went up the stairs. Dumbledore was behind his desk with tea already laid out for two, which meant he'd been waiting, and portraits of former headmasters were doing that thing they did when something interesting was happening, all of them alert, positioned in their frames at the most convenient angles, some pretending to sleep with the very slight additional rigidity of people who are pretending too hard. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Please, sit." Harry sat. He took the tea because it was there and he liked tea. Dumbledore studied him for a moment with those blue eyes that were doing their usual thing of being simultaneously warm and very, very deep. "You've read the Prophet?" "Yes." "And you've had the night to consider what happened yesterday?" "Yes." Dumbledore wrapped both hands around his own cup. "I want to say, first and most importantly, that I am not going to suggest you manage this quietly or step back from it or present it in any particular way for the benefit of," he paused. "For the benefit of other people's comfort." Harry looked at him. "I appreciate that. What I am going to suggest," Dumbledore continued, "is that you allow me to help you understand the landscape you've just entered. Not to navigate it for you. To describe it." He set down his cup. "Because the Ministry's reaction, anonymous official. Already quoted in the Prophet." "Yes." Dumbledore's mouth curved slightly. "Cornelius received a very early copy of this morning's paper, I expect. He will be concerned." "Why?" Harry asked directly. "Because," Dumbledore said, "Cornelius Fudge has spent 6 years building a relationship with magical Britain predicated on the idea that all authority flows through the Ministry of Magic. That the Ministry is the final arbiter of magical law. The existence of a pre-ministry sovereign claim, particularly one with ICW backing, is not merely an inconvenience. It is an existential challenge to the structure he administers." Harry absorbed this. "He'll try to discredit it." "He'll try to discredit it," Dumbledore agreed. "Methodically and through official channels, with considerable resources and the full weight of the bureaucratic apparatus behind him." He paused. "He is not a stupid man, whatever his failings. He will move carefully." "All right," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. You are taking this rather in stride. I've been thinking about it, Harry said. Since last night. He held the older man's gaze. I'm 14. I'm in a tournament I didn't enter. There's a dark wizard trying to come back to life with my blood specifically, apparently. Someone in this school let my name out of that cup. He paused. If the Emperor thing is real, and Madame Evangeline seems very sure that it is, then it's mine. It's not something I asked for, but it's not something I'm going to apologize for either. He looked at the desk. I'm tired of apologizing for the things that are mine. The portrait behind Dumbledore's left shoulder, a former headmistress with elaborate silver hair, made a small, involuntary sound that was either approval or surprise. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Your mother, he said at last. Harry looked up. Lily had a quality, Dumbledore said, carefully, as though he were handling something fragile not because it was delicate but because it was valuable. I noted it when she was a student here. A quality of fundamental self-possession. Not arrogance. Something older than arrogance. She knew, at some deep level, what she was. And she acted from that knowledge rather than from other people's definitions of her. He paused. I understood it as character. I understand it differently this morning. Harry was quiet for a moment. Did you know about the bloodline? No, Dumbledore said, simply and immediately, and Harry believed him. If I had, I would have told you. I hope you know that. Harry considered the old man across the desk, the centuries of accumulated wisdom and the genuine care underneath the strategy, the way he loved the people in his protection with an architect's love, sometimes losing the living thing inside the blueprint. He wasn't perfect. He managed things that didn't need managing and protected people in ways that sometimes crushed them. But he was honest, mostly, and he was trying, genuinely. I know, Harry said. Evangeline has requested a meeting with you today, Dumbledore said, transitioning. She was quite firm about it. I told her I'd pass the message along. When? Whenever you're ready. She didn't specify a time. I rather got the impression she considers herself on your schedule. Harry blinked. My schedule. You are, according to approximately 300 years of dormant Veela law, her sovereign, Dumbledore said, with a dryness that was, Harry thought, probably his version of enjoying the situation. Harry stood up. Tell her after morning classes. The courtyard by the east entrance. He picked up his bag. And Professor, the anonymous Wisengamot source in the Prophet. I'd like to know who that was when you find out. He said it casually, at the door, the way you say something you expect to be done. Dumbledore, sitting at his desk, felt something very specific and slightly unfamiliar, which was the sensation of having his assumptions about a person revised in real time and somewhat radically. Of course, he said. Harry went to class. Potions was third period, which meant Harry got 2 hours of normal schoolwork before the day truly complicated itself, and he was grateful for that. He sat through charms with the practical focus of someone who decided that being a Veela Emperor was not an excuse for letting his silencio get sloppy, and got full marks on the practical component, and felt the small satisfying click of a thing done correctly. Potions was Snape, which meant it was going to be interesting. Snape had, since the Prophet landed that morning, been in a state that his students had learned to identify but never quite got used to, a kind of coiled internal intensity, like a spring under tension, that expressed itself in very precise, very targeted coldness rather than the general ambient hostility of his usual bad moods. He swept in, robes billowing, and began the lesson without looking at Harry at all, which was itself a form of looking. Harry brewed his draught of peace with precise attention, measuring ingredients carefully, keeping his flame even. He'd gotten better at potions in the last year, not because he liked it more, but because he'd realized that Snape's contempt for his work was at least partly accurate, and he'd decided to make it inaccurate, partly because he hated giving Snape valid ammunition and partly because the potions themselves were genuinely interesting once you stopped flinching every time someone swept past your cauldron. Halfway through the lesson, Snape stopped at his table. Harry kept working. He was in the middle of a temperature-sensitive step, and this was not the moment for anything other than the temperature-sensitive step. Snape stood there for a long, deliberate moment. Then, Potter. Just a moment, sir. He completed the step. Let the mixture settle. Then he looked up. Snape's dark eyes were doing something unusual. The usual hostility was present, but it was layered over something else, something Harry had never seen there before. Conflict, maybe. Or the private reckoning of a man who has strong feelings about a complicated history and has just been handed new information that changes the shape of it. The Prophet, Snape said. Yes, sir. Sensationalist journalism has a long history of distorting reality for commercial purposes. Yes, sir, Harry said. In this case, the reporter wrote exactly what happened, because I asked her to. Snape looked at him for a long moment with that strange layered expression, and then said, very quietly, your mother had a particular quality of fire that I could never account for. Harry said nothing. He held Snape's gaze and let the silence be what it was. She was the finest potions student of her generation, Snape said. As though this were the natural continuation of what he'd been saying. As though it were the same thing. Her intuitive grasp of ingredient interaction was, he stopped. The professional shell closed back over whatever had briefly been visible beneath it, and his voice returned to its usual flat precision. Your technique has improved. Do not let the moonstone steep beyond 40 seconds. He moved on. Harry looked at the back of Snape's robes for a moment. Then he watched his moonstone and counted to 37, and thought about fire, and mothers, and the things people carry around in them that they almost never say out loud. The courtyard by the east entrance was quiet in the afternoon light, a small flagstone space bordered by a low stone wall and a raised garden bed that was doing its November best with a handful of frost-resistant herbs and general determination. Harry arrived first and sat on the wall and waited without minding the waiting. He heard Evangeline before he saw her, not her footsteps but the quality of attention that preceded her, that settling of the air he'd noticed yesterday. She came around the corner alone, without the attendant Beauxbatons professors, dressed in practical dark clothes that looked old and extremely good, a walking stick she clearly didn't need in her right hand. Behind her, at a polite distance of about 6 paces, came Fleur. Harry hadn't expected Fleur. But he wasn't surprised, exactly. Evangeline sat down on the wall across from him without preamble and looked at him with her wintermoon eyes and said, You want to know what you are? I want to know what it means, Harry said. What I'm supposed to do. Good distinction. She approved of it, clearly. Many people ask the first. Very few ask the second. The first one seems like the less useful question. It is. She settled her walking stick across her knees. Let me ask you something first. What do you feel when a Veela uses allure on you? Harry considered this. He'd been in proximity to Fleur several times since the Beauxbatons' arrival, and he'd noticed, he wasn't oblivious, and Fleur's allure was not subtle, but it had been less like being struck by it and more like watching a lighthouse from a distance. Present. Clear. Something to note rather than something to drown in. I notice it, he said. But it doesn't pull at me. It's more like I can see it. Evangeline nodded as though this confirmed something. Emperor blood filters allure the way a prism filters light, it separates the component from its effect. You see the working rather than experience the product. This is intentional. You cannot arbitrate a dispute between a Veela and a wizard if the Veela's primary magical expression clouds your judgment. That's practical, Harry said. The bloodline is nothing if not practical. Something moved across her face. The fire is something else. What fire? She held out her hand, palm up, and looked at him with steady patience. Harry looked at her hand. Then at his own. Then he thought about fire, about the word Ollivander had used, sovereign fire, about what Evangeline had called it yesterday, and something in him reached toward the concept the way a plant reaches toward a window, not by thinking about it but by being what it was. A flame appeared in his palm. It was small. It was very still. And it was not orange or red but a deep, clear gold, and it did not flicker even in the small wind moving through the courtyard. Harry stared at it. He had not known he could do that. Fleur made a soft sound from her position 6 paces back. "You didn't know," Evangeline said. "No," Harry said. He was looking at the flame with the focused attention he gave to things that surprised him, curious rather than alarmed, studying rather than flinching. It didn't hurt. It felt, if anything, like holding something that had always been there and had simply never been offered the right shape to take. "It will grow," Evangeline said. "Not with training, exactly. With understanding. The more clearly you know what you are, the more completely it expresses." She looked at the flame. "Your mother's fire was dormant because she didn't know. She felt things she couldn't account for. She made choices that felt inevitable to her but baffling to others." The gold eyes lifted to his face. "Does that sound familiar?" Harry thought about a great many things, rapidly. "Yes," he said. He closed his hand. The flame went out without smoke or heat, as cleanly as a candle in still air. "The colonies," he said. "Hermione said representatives will come. Within the week. Perhaps sooner. 12 colonies on the continent currently, 4 of them holding Veela elders old enough to have been alive for the last emperor." She paused. "They will be formal. They will be testing you. They will arrive with expectations built from 3 centuries of stories." "What do I do?" "Exactly what you did yesterday," she said. "Nothing more and nothing less. You ask what things mean and you answer what you're asked and you do not perform anything that you do not feel." Her voice took on a private firmness. "The Emperor line has no tolerance for performance. The aura reads intent before it reads action. Any elder worth her age will know within 30 seconds whether you are genuine. And if they don't like what they find?" Harry asked. "Then they will say so, and you will discuss it, and you will reach an understanding or you won't." Evangeline shrugged, with the very particular Gallic shrug of someone who has made their peace with the full range of human response. "You are not required to be liked. You are required to be real." Harry sat with that for a moment. "Then, what's the glass vial?" "The one with light in it." Evangeline stilled. It was a very small stillness, barely visible, but it was there. "You saw that last night?" she asked. "I saw you take it out. I couldn't see it clearly but," he paused. "I felt it." The stillness resolved into something that was almost wonder. "Through a castle wall," she said, quietly, to herself. Then, aloud, "It is called a trace loom. A recorded aura impression. The last emperor, the one before you, 3 centuries ago, gave a fragment of his aura to my ancestor before he died. So that his line could be recognized if it appeared again." She reached into her pocket and placed the vial on the wall between them. Up close, the light inside was extraordinary. It coiled and shifted, gold and white and something underneath that was neither. And Harry felt it the same way he'd felt it through the wall, a kind of resonance, like a tuning fork held near its matching note. He knew the line wasn't ending, Evangeline said. He knew it was only sleeping. He said, she paused, and her voice had age in it, the weight of a story told many times in private. He said, "Give this to your daughter's daughters until it wakes again." And when it wakes, she stopped. "When it wakes?" Harry said. She looked at him. He said, "Tell them the fire was never lost. Only carried." Harry looked at the vial. The light inside brightened, very slightly, the same way it had when Evangeline had spoken to it the night before. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. He looked at it and felt it looking back, and it was not mystical or dramatic, it was simply the quiet acknowledgement of 2 things that recognized each other. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it in more directions than one. Fleur had moved, during this conversation, from her polite 6-pace distance to somewhere much closer, close enough that Harry could see her expression clearly now, and it was doing something complicated. The cool, evaluative study was still there, but it had been joined by something else, something softer at the edges and less armored, and she was looking at the vial and then at him with the expression of someone watching two things that were always supposed to be in the same place finally occupy it. "You've been listening," Harry said to her. "Yes," Fleur said. Not apologetically. She didn't apologize for paying attention. "Good," Harry said. "You probably need to know most of that." She blinked. "Why would I? Because your grandmother is the one who declared it, and that means your family is going to be in the middle of whatever happens next." He looked at her steadily. "And because you were going to tell me whether that bothers you, I think." Fleur looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to her grandmother and said, in French, with pointed significance, "You were right." "I usually am," Evangeline said, serenely. "What did you say?" Harry asked. "That you are not small," Fleur said, and the precision with which she said it left no room for misunderstanding. She meant it in the way that had nothing to do with height. That evening, the ministry owl arrived. It was a large, official-looking bird with ministry seals on both feet and the particular bearing of a creature that had been selected for government service specifically because it looked important. It found Harry at dinner and dropped a rolled parchment bearing the seal of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and then positioned itself on the table with the visible expectation of a reply. Harry broke the seal. "Read it." "Read it again." He passed it to Hermione. She read it, and her face went through several stages. "They're calling it an unauthorized invocation of defunct magical law," she said. "They want a formal meeting with you, your guardian, and they're citing the Department of—" She stopped, and her voice sharpened with the particular edge of someone who has just spotted an injustice and is already building the counterargument. "Harry, they want Dumbledore to attend as your legal representative. They're trying to preposition him as your guardian in a legal context, which would mean that my legal standing gets filtered through a minister-recognized trustee," Harry said. Hermione stared at him. Ron stared at him. "What?" Harry said. "How did you?" Hermione started. "I read," Harry said, slightly indignant. "I do read." Ron was pressing his mouth together very hard against a laugh. Harry took the letter back. He read it a third time, carefully, and then he picked up a quill, turned the parchment over, and wrote his reply. Short, clear, and civil. He blotted it, rolled it, and held it out to the ministry owl. "What did you write?" Hermione asked. "That I'm happy to meet with the ministry. That I'll be bringing my own legal representation." He paused. "That I'll be in touch about timing once I've spoken with Madame Evangeline Delacour, who is available as my Veela law counsel, and that in the meantime I'd like all further communications to acknowledge my full name and titles as recognized under the Veela Sovereign Accords of 1192. Hermione's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "The Accords require it," Harry said, reasonably. "It's a formal request under recognized law. They can ignore it, but then they're publicly on record ignoring a recognized legal protocol, which is its own kind of statement." "Harry," Hermione said. That is actually quite, I told you I read." "You've been thinking about this since this morning," she said, with the tone of someone who is both impressed and slightly flustered at being outmaneuvered on their own ground. "Since last night, actually," Harry said. He handed the owl the letter and it departed with great self-importance. He went back to his dinner. Across the hall, Draco Malfoy had watched the ministry owl arrive and watched Harry's response to it, and was currently sitting with an expression of deeply private, deeply uncomfortable recalibration. Draco had grown up with very specific ideas about power, about where it came from, who had it, what it looked like, how it behaved. His father had given him those ideas with great care and considerable investment. The ideas were not surviving contact with this evening. He looked at Crabbe and Goyle, who were eating, obliviously. He looked at his own hands on the table. He looked at Harry Potter, who was laughing at something Weasley had said and looked absolutely nothing like someone who had just fired a legal shot across the Ministry's bow. Draco thought about his father. About what his father would do with information like this, what move would be made, what alliance offered or withheld. He thought about what side of that move he wanted to be on. He didn't reach a conclusion that evening. But he kept thinking. And Draco Malfoy, whatever else he was not stupid, and he kept thinking for a long time. In her guest quarters, Evangeline read Harry's reply to the Ministry Owl. She had a copy because she had made it very clear that all correspondence pertaining to Emperor matters should be copied to her, and the Hogwarts Owls had accommodated this with the flexibility of creatures who understood authority when they encountered it, and she read it twice and then sat back with an expression of profound, uncomplicated satisfaction. She took out the trace loom and set it on the table in front of her. Trace bien, she told it. Very good. The light inside coiled and brightened and was, for a moment, warm as the sun. Outside, the sky over the lake had gone the deep plum-and ink of late November evening, and in the castle above, Harry Potter was reading 3 chapters of Hermione's notes before bed and finding, to no one's surprise except possibly his own, that he was genuinely interested in what they said. The fire in his blood read quietly in the lamplight. Patient. Present. Awake. Chapter 3, Old Laws, Older Teeth. The first task was in 3 days, and Harry knew it was dragons. He knew because Hagrid had shown him, the night before, with the particular well-meaning indiscretion of someone who loved Harry enough to break a rule and wasn't subtle enough to wonder if he should. 4 dragons, each in a separate enclosure at the edge of the forest, each enormous and terrible and beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they could kill you without noticing. Harry had stood at the edge of the tree-line and watched a Welsh green breathe a column of fire 40 feet into the November air and felt something in his blood respond to it, not fear, which was what any reasonable person would have felt, but a kind of ancient recognition, like seeing a distant relative at a family gathering. The dragon had turned its head and looked at him. Not at Hagrid, who was closer. At Harry. Directly, deliberately, with those amber eyes the size of dinner plates, and it had held that look for a long moment before turning away, and Hagrid had said, puzzled, "Huh. She doesn't usually," and trailed off. Harry had thought about that look all the way back to the castle. Now he sat in the library with Hermione's research spread across half the table and Ron across from him, and they were ostensibly doing Transfiguration homework but actually doing 3 different things simultaneously, which was becoming their default operating mode. The summoning charm, Hermione said, for the second time, in the careful voice of someone laying out a very sensible plan. You've been practicing it. If you can summon your firebolt, the task is assessed on how you handle the dragon, Harry said. Not just whether you get the egg. Well, yes, but, I'm not hiding from it, Harry said. Hermione and Ron both looked at him. It was a specific kind of look, the one that had been appearing more frequently since Monday, calibrating, trying to reconcile the Harry they'd known for 3 years with whatever this version was. Nobody said hide, Ron said. The plan involves getting around it without engaging it, Harry said. Which is, that's fine, that's a good plan, Hermione, the summoning charm is smart. But I'm not going to fly figure eights around a dragon and call that handling it. He paused. I want to talk to it. Both of them stared at him. You want to, Ron said. Talk to a dragon. I talked to a basilisk, Harry said reasonably. Sort of. It was trying to kill me at the time, but the point stands. Parseltongue doesn't work on dragons, Hermione said immediately. They're not serpentine in the magical family sense, the linguistic. I'm not going to use Parseltongue, Harry said. He looked at his hand, at the inside of his wrist. The Welsh green looked at me, Hermione. She turned her head and found me specifically, in the dark, when Hagrid was between us. And she looked. He spread his hand open on the table. Evangeline said Emperor Fire resonates with old magic. Dragons are old magic. Very old. Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. Then she said, In a different voice, the one she used when she was crossing a threshold from known to unknown territory and had decided to follow the evidence rather than the map, that would be unprecedented. Most things I do are unprecedented, Harry said. Ron laughed, sudden and genuine. That's fair, he said. That is genuinely fair. They practiced summoning charms in the empty classroom anyway, because unprecedented was not the same as guaranteed, and Harry was not the kind of person who went into dangerous situations with only one option. He practiced until the firebolt came reliably from the far end of the room at a clean whistle, and then he kept practicing until it came at barely a thought, the wand motion reduced to a reflex, and then he put the wand away and thought about dragons and fire and resonance and what it meant when something ancient looked at you and recognized you back. The next morning, two things happened before breakfast. The first was that the Veela delegation arrived. Harry heard them from the Gryffindor staircase, a change in the quality of the morning air, a warmth that didn't come from any fireplace, and then voices in the entrance hall below with French and something older underneath the French, a language that sounded like it had been spoken before French existed. He came downstairs and found Evangeline in the entrance hall with three women who were clearly Veela elders, not in the half-human way of most of the Veela he'd encountered but fully, unmistakably, their human forms so precisely maintained it had the quality of a choice rather than a default state. They wore their age the same way Evangeline wore hers, as accumulated gravity. The central one was tall, with copper-gold hair and the kind of presence that made the entrance hall feel smaller. She saw Harry on the stairs and went absolutely still, and then she crossed the hall with the speed of someone who has been waiting 3 centuries and is done with waiting, and she stopped in front of him and looked at him with eyes that were the amber of old firelight and said something in the old language, not French, the older one, and her voice broke slightly on the last word. Harry didn't understand the words. But he felt the meaning as clearly as if she'd said it in English: recognition, relief, something that was almost grief resolving into something that was almost joy. He said, "Good morning," and offered his hand. She looked at his hand, and then she did something that clearly surprised even Evangeline. She took it in both of hers and pressed it to her forehead, briefly, with the reverence of someone performing a gesture they'd practiced only in their imagination for a very long time. When she straightened, her eyes were bright. "I am Seraphine," she said, in French-accented English. "Elder of the lawyer colony. Oldest on the continent." She was still holding his hand. "I was 7 years old when the last emperor died. I remember what the aura felt like. I had given up hope of feeling it again." "I'm glad you're here," Harry said. He meant it straightforwardly, which was apparently the correct response, because she released his hand and straightened and became abruptly professional in the way very old people become professional when they've allowed themselves a moment of feeling and are ready to proceed. "We will speak formally this afternoon," she said. "The declaration must be received and recorded." "This afternoon," Harry agreed. The second thing that happened was Draco Malfoy. Harry was at breakfast when Draco appeared at the end of the Gryffindor table, which he had never done before in 4 years of school, and stood there with the rigid posture of someone doing something that cost them something but had decided to do it anyway. Ron tensed. Hermione looked up from her book. "Potter," Draco said. "I need to talk to you." "All right," Harry said. "Privately." Harry looked at him for a moment, read the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes moved briefly to the Slytherin table and back, and understood that this was not a conversation Draco wanted witnessed by his usual audience. He stood up and walked to the side of the hall, near one of the windows, and waited. Draco followed him. Up close, he looked like he hadn't slept well, and his usual contemptuous composure was doing significant structural work to hold something else in, not fear, exactly, but a kind of urgent necessity. "My father," Draco said, without preamble, "is going to be contacted by the ministry this week. About you." He looked at the window rather than Harry's face. "Fudge has a network. People who support him, in the Wisengamot. My father has been part of that network for a long time. And what Fudge wants," he stopped. "Reset. They're going to try to say the declaration was fraudulent. That Madame Delacour was confused, or compromised, or lying for political reasons. They have 3 people prepared to testify that the Veela Sovereign Accords were formally dissolved in 1784 as part of a trade agreement with the French ministry. Which is, he finally looked at Harry. It's not true. I looked it up last night. They're going to fabricate it. Harry looked at him. Why are you telling me this? Draco's jaw tightened. He looked like he was eating something unpleasant but had committed to finishing it. Because my father told me once. He stopped again, and when he continued his voice was quieter. He told me the Dark Lord was not gone. That we should be ready. That the things we've built are in service of a return. He met Harry's eyes. If the Emperor line is real, and I spent 3 hours in the library last night and I think it is, then the Dark Lord would move against it. Which means everything my father. He cut himself off. The window was apparently very interesting. I don't want to be on the side of the thing that's going to lose. It was honest, Harry thought. Not noble. Draco wasn't claiming nobility, but honest. There was no pretense of having a change of heart or suddenly discovering the error of his ways. He was making a calculation, and he was being straight about what the calculation was based on. The 1784 dissolution, Harry said. You said you looked it up. There's no record of it in the Hogwarts library. But the ministry has restricted sections in their archives. If they're going to fabricate it, they'll need a physical document. Harry nodded slowly. Hermione can look at what's publicly available. Evangeline will know the Veela records. And if the document they're going to produce is fabricated, he paused. It'll be fabricated recently. Paper, ink, binding style, all of that can be checked. Draco said nothing. But something in his posture shifted, very slightly, in the manner of a person who has handed over something heavy and is adjusting to the absence of the weight. Malfoy, Harry said. Draco looked at him. I'm not your friend yet, Harry said. But I'm not going to pretend this conversation didn't happen, either. He paused. Don't get in the way and don't be a problem, and we'll see what the rest of the year looks like. Draco held his gaze for a moment, and then gave a single, precise nod that contained an enormous amount of unspoken complexity. He walked back to the Slytherin table without looking at Harry again. Ron, who had been watching from the Gryffindor table with the focused attention of someone who had known Harry long enough to understand that unusual things required careful witnessing, said, when Harry returned, was that what it looked like? Probably, Harry said. Right, Ron said. He thought about it. I don't like it. You don't have to. But you're going to use it anyway. I'm going to act on accurate information, Harry said. The source of accurate information is secondary to whether it's accurate. Ron stared at him. When did you become like this? Monday, Harry said. I think. Hermione had not said anything. She was sitting very still with her hands on the table and an expression that Harry recognized, the one where she'd already run 3 steps ahead of the conversation and was waiting for everyone else to catch up. The 1784 documentation, she said. I'll start this morning. If they're planning to produce a fabricated treaty dissolution in a formal hearing, there will be inconsistencies. Legal documents from that period have very specific formatting conventions. I'll need to check the ICW records. Evangeline will have access to Veela records, Harry said. I'll ask her this afternoon. I'll need a list of primary historical sources from her side and I'll cross-reference. Hermione was already writing. Her quill moved with the speed of someone who has found their purpose and is moving toward it at full velocity. Harry, if we can demonstrate the document is fabricated before the hearing, we don't just win the argument. We prove deliberate fraud by ministry officials. That's not just a point in your favor, that's Fudge losing his job, Ron said, with the dawning comprehension of someone seeing a chessboard 3 moves ahead for the first time. That's Fudge potentially losing his job. That's a secondary outcome, Harry said. The primary one is that the legal framework stands and the colonies are protected. Ron looked at him. You just said, the colonies. They're my responsibility, Harry said simply, and ate his toast. The formal reception of the declaration happened in the small sitting room adjacent to the Beauxbatons delegation's quarters, which had been rearranged with the careful attention to positioning and symbolic detail that Harry was beginning to understand was inseparable from Veela formal proceedings. Seraphine and her two companions stood with Evangeline, and they had brought with them two items that Harry recognized from Hermione's notes, a registre d'aura, a bound record of recognized sovereign auras dating back before the written word, and a small brazier containing what Hermione had described as feu témoin, witness fire, which would register the truth of any declaration made before it. The fire in the brazier was gold. Harry stood in front of it, in his Hogwarts uniform because he didn't own anything more formal and the elders had not suggested he needed anything more formal, and Seraphine spoke in French and Evangeline translated simultaneously in a low murmur at his ear, and the ceremony was ancient and precise and felt, to Harry's considerable surprise, genuinely right, not like something performed but like something remembered. When it came to his part, he said the words Evangeline had given him, in French, and felt the gold fire in the brazier flare briefly and settle into something deeper and steadier, and the three elders looked at it and then at him and nodded with the settled finality of a thing confirmed. Seraphine spoke. She says, Evangeline translated, that the declaration is received and the recognition is complete. That the line is restored. That the colonies will be informed. She paused. She says she hopes you understand what you carry. Tell her I'm working on it, Harry said. Evangeline translated. Seraphine looked at him, and something in her old amber eyes was warm with an appreciation that went beyond approval. She said something brief. She says, Evangeline translated, with a smile that was rare on her face and absolutely genuine, that is the right answer. The day of the first task arrived the way important days always do, with the peculiar quality of an ordinary morning that has been assigned an extraordinary afternoon. Breakfast tasted normal. The sky was normal November gray. The castle made its usual sounds. And then 2 o'clock came and Harry walked with his fellow champions to the champions' tent at the edge of the stadium and the roar of the crowd was a physical thing, a wall of sound that had weight and warmth, and the task was real. Ludo Bagman was in the tent, vibrating with his particular brand of enthusiastic obliviousness. Champions. Today is, dragons, Crumb said, flatly. Bagman blinked. Well. Yes. How did, we all know, Cedric said, without particular heat. Bagman adjusted. Right. Yes. Well. Each champion must retrieve a golden egg from the nest of a nesting female dragon. The egg is among her real clutch. The judges will be assessing on how you manage, broadly. Style, efficiency, nerve. He paused. The order is, Miss Delacour first, then Mr. Crumb, Mr. Diggory, and then Mr. Potter. Fleur turned to Harry when Bagman had bustled out, and she looked at him with an expression that had lost most of its careful architecture and was simply, for the moment, direct. Are you ready? Yes, Harry said. You are not at all nervous. A bit, he said. But not about the dragon. She tilted her head slightly. About whether what I think will work actually works, he said. She looked at him for a moment, and then said something she'd clearly decided to say carefully. My grandmother said, she said your fire reads true to old magic. To things that have been here longer than wizards. She paused. Dragons have been here longer than wizards. Yeah, Harry said. That's what I'm counting on. The cannon blast announced the start. Fleur went first, and Harry could hear, even from the tent, through the tent's canvas and the noise of the crowd, when her dragon breathed fire and when it didn't, when the crowd gasped and when it roared. She emerged 20 minutes later, slightly singed at the hem of her robes and enormously dignified about it, holding her golden egg, her score already going up on the board. She had used a sleeping charm that had partially worked, the dragon was sufficiently dazed, and her technique had been elegant and efficient. She sat down and looked at Harry. Crumb went. His approach was direct and brutal and effective. He conjunctivitis cursed his dragon, which was viscerally uncomfortable to listen to, but it worked, and he came back with his egg. Cedric went. He used a transfiguration approach, conjured a dog and used it as a distraction. Clean. Clever. And then the cannon fired for Harry. He walked out of the tent into the arena, and the first thing that hit him was the noise, 400 people making the particular sound of people who have been building anticipation for a specific moment and have now had it delivered. The second thing was the smell, smoke and stone and something ancient underneath both of those. The Hungarian horntail was in the center of the arena. She was black and enormous and the color of deep space, covered in bronze-tipped spikes, and she was crouched over her eggs with the protective intent of something that had been protecting its young since before this castle existed. She saw Harry the moment he walked out and fixed him with her amber and black eyes, and her tail swept a deliberate arc and the crowd fell back a little, collectively. Harry didn't raise his wand. The crowd's noise shifted, the specific shift from excited to uncertain, the note that enters crowd sound when what's happening isn't what they expected. He walked toward her. Not fast. Not slow. The walk of someone who has a destination and trusts their own legs to get them there. He kept his eyes on hers and kept his breathing even and reached inside himself toward the thing that had put a gold flame in his palm in a courtyard 3 days ago, the thing that had lit when he'd thought fire. The horntail's tail stopped sweeping. 20 feet. 15. 10. She raised her head and made a sound, not the challenge sound she'd been making, the low rolling thunder of a creature warning something to leave, but a different sound, higher and more complex, the sound of a creature that has encountered something unexpected and is reassessing. Harry stopped at 8 feet. He held out his hand. Open. Palm up. Not offering anything, not demanding anything, just presenting. The gesture of an honest introduction. The flame appeared in his palm, small and gold and absolutely steady, and he held it and let her look at it and waited. The crowd had gone very quiet. The horntail stretched her neck down, slowly, with the precise deliberation of a creature that knows exactly what it can do and chooses in each moment whether to do it. She brought her enormous head level with Harry's, close enough that he could feel the heat of her breath, and she looked at the flame in his palm with those amber eyes. Then she sniffed it. And then something remarkable happened, which was that the Hungarian horntail, bred for aggression, classified XXXXX, the most dangerous dragon species in existence, made a sound that had no category in any dragon handler's records, a low, resonant sound that was not a growl and not a warning and could only be described as acknowledgement, and she shifted on her nest and turned her head to show him the golden egg sitting among her clutch with the deliberate clarity of something being offered. Rather than surrendered. Harry closed his hand. The flame went out. He walked forward and picked up the golden egg. He turned and walked back toward the exit. And then the crowd found its voice again, and it was enormous, and it was unlike anything Harry had ever heard before, not just cheering but something louder and more complex, the sound of 400 people processing something that had just exceeded every category they prepared for this moment. In the judges' stand, the scores went up. 10. 10. 9, Karkaroff, who gave everyone lower than they deserved. 10. 10. 49 points. Clear first. Harry walked into the tent and Fleur was standing and her expression was the most open he'd ever seen it, all the careful architecture fully down, just a person who had just watched something extraordinary and was not pretending she hadn't. How, she said. Fire recognizes fire, Harry said. He was breathing harder than he'd looked. His hands were shaking slightly, which he'd expected. Adrenaline didn't care what your bloodline was. She wasn't my enemy. She was just a mother protecting her children. He paused. I wasn't there to take from her. I asked. Fleur stared at him. You asked. A Hungarian horntail. More or less. In what language? Harry thought about this. I don't know, he said, honestly. The one we both understood. Fleur looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, quietly and privately, in French, something she'd probably intended to keep to herself, and then she seemed to realize she'd said it aloud and looked briefly startled at herself. What was that? Harry asked. Nothing, Fleur said, and turned to look at the scoreboard. Harry let it go. But he filed it, the way he was finding himself filing a great many things involving Fleur Delacour, carefully, with a private warmth, in a place that felt like it had been waiting for exactly that kind of thing. Hermione met them outside the tent, nearly vibrating. Harry, she said, I found the record. The 1784 documents, I cross-referenced against the French Ministry archives that are publicly accessible through the ICW library catalogue, and there is no corresponding record on the French side. None. A trade agreement of that kind would require dual registration, and the French side shows nothing. And, she was already pulling out parchment, covered in her close-written notes. The formatting conventions for 1784 British Ministry documents used a specific seal impression that changed in 1791. If they produce a document with that seal dated to 1784, it'll be right, Harry said. Or wrong, Hermione corrected. If they research it carefully, they might actually get it right, but then the French record gap is still there. She was walking beside him, matching his pace, her notes held out like a map. More importantly, Evangeline's records. I need to cross-reference with her tonight. I'll arrange it, Harry said. Harry. She stopped, and he turned, and she was looking at him with bright eyes and something that was past impressed and into something more personal, more specific to them and their particular history. You walked up to a Hungarian horntail. I walked up to a Hungarian horntail, he confirmed. And you're fine. More or less. She grabbed him and hugged him, sudden and fierce, the hug of someone who has been afraid and is releasing it. He hugged her back with genuine warmth, and over her shoulder Ron was grinning, the full unguarded Ron grin that appeared when everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. Right, Ron said. Fire whiskey for Harry. Well, butterbeer. Point stands. The celebration in Gryffindor Tower that night was loud and long and full of the specific wild energy of people who had watched something incredible and needed to talk about it collectively for several hours before they could process it individually. Harry sat in his armchair by the fire and answered questions and laughed at jokes and ate too many of the caramelized something or others that the house elves had sent up, and felt the warmth of the room around him, genuine and uncomplicated and exactly the right thing. Late, when the common room had thinned and the fire had settled into embers, Harry sat alone for a little while. Ron had fallen asleep in the chair across from him, which was a Ron habit of long standing. Hermione had gone up with her notes an hour ago. He turned the golden egg over in his hands. Dull gold, heavy, with the dragon's warmth still in it somehow. He pressed the catch and it opened and the sound came out, the screaming, high-pitched wail that made no sense and clearly meant something. He closed it. Thought about water. About things that sounded like noise above the surface and like language below it. He set the egg on the table and looked at the fire. He thought about the horntail's eyes. About Evangeline's trace loom. About Seraphine saying I hope you understand what you carry. About Draco Malfoy eating something unpleasant with deliberate commitment. About Fleur saying something under her breath in French that she hadn't intended to say out loud. He thought about his mother, about Lily Evans, who had felt things she couldn't account for and made choices that felt inevitable to her and never knew why. He looked at his hands. A low gold light moved under his skin like bioluminescence, barely visible, warm and steady and patient as a pulse. Fire, he thought. I know. I'm getting there. The light under his skin steadied and then settled, like a thing satisfied with the direction things were going. Across the castle, in the Beauxbatons guest wing, Fleur sat at her desk and looked at a blank piece of parchment for a long time and eventually wrote a letter to her mother, telling her what had happened. She described the ceremony. The formal reception. The declaration formally recorded. She wrote about the task. About watching him walk toward a horntail with nothing raised and nothing hidden. She wrote, I said something I didn't intend to say and he heard me and he let it go. I don't think he let it go because he missed it. I think he let it go because he understood it was mine to decide what to do with. She stopped writing and looked at that sentence. Then she folded the letter up and did not send it yet, and sat for a while with her pen in her hand and thought about gold fire and patient eyes and a boy who asked what things meant before deciding how to feel about them. She thought about that for quite a long time. Chapter 4, The Cost of Being Seen. The morning after the first task, Harry found a note under his dormitory door. Not an owl, a note, hand-delivered, slipped under the gap in the small hours before anyone was awake. The parchment was heavy and cream-colored, the handwriting compact and precise, and it smelled faintly of something Harry couldn't identify, old paper and something warmer underneath, like cedar or wood smoke. Meet me at the boathouse. 7 o'clock. Come alone. Harry looked at it for a moment. Ron was still asleep. Hermione was presumably in her dormitory. The castle outside his window was doing its quiet pre-dawn thing, that particular quality of Hogwarts in the early morning when it seemed to breathe differently, deeper and slower. He got dressed and went to the boathouse. Fleur was already there, standing at the open end facing the lake, her arms crossed not against the cold but against herself, the posture of someone who has made a decision and is holding it in place with physical structure while they wait for the moment to execute it. The lake was still and gray-green in the early light. The squid had one tentacle above the surface, lazily, as though taking the air. She turned when she heard him. "You heard what I said yesterday," she said. No preamble. Direct, like a blade laid on a table. "Yes," Harry said. "Then you know what I said." He came to stand beside her at the open end of the boathouse, not facing her but beside her, looking out at the lake. "You said it was impossible," he said. In French. "You said what he's doing is impossible, but he's doing it." Fleur was quiet for a moment. "And you let it go." "It was yours," he said. "What you meant by it?" He paused. "I didn't want to take it. So I left it." Another silence. The lake moved in its slow, enormous way. "I grew up," Fleur said, understanding what I was. Being told what I was, constantly, by people who saw the allure first and the person somewhere behind it, if at all. Her voice was precise and unemotional in the way of someone who has processed something difficult and arrived at clarity rather than bitterness. Beaux batons prepared me for competition. My family prepared me for everything else. My grandmother prepared me for something I didn't understand until Monday. She turned her head to look at him. "I came here thinking I knew what the Triwizard tournament was. I came here thinking I knew what every person in it was. And now?" Harry said. "Now," she said, "I am revising." Harry looked at her. Up close, in the early morning light without the performative composure she wore in public like a second uniform, she was different, not less beautiful, not less formidable, but more legible. More present in her own face. "That must be annoying," he said. "For someone who's usually right." Something crossed her expression that was absolutely not a smile but was structurally adjacent to one. "Deeply," she said. "I dislike being wrong." "I know," he said. "You made that clear in the corridor the first week. When you told Ron his French was an insult to France. His French was an insult to France. He was trying. Poorly. He was still trying," Harry said, without heat. "That counts for something." Fleur looked at him. The almost smile became, briefly, an actual one, small and sharp and genuine. "You defend your friends the way other people defend their principles." "Same thing," Harry said. She turned back to the lake. They stood for a while in the particular comfortable silence of two people who are not yet close but have arrived at an honest footing, which is its own kind of closeness. "My grandmother," Fleur said at last, "told me last night that Emperor Aura doesn't just read intent. It resonates with what things actually are, underneath. Not what they perform." She paused. "She said it would be very difficult to be dishonest around you." "I don't force anyone to be honest," Harry said immediately. "No. But being dishonest in the presence of something that simply sees truly, she searched for the right word. It becomes effortful. More effortful than it's worth. She looked at him sideways. Is that why you let people's words go? When they say things they didn't intend? I know the difference between something said and something meant, Harry said. Usually. He looked at the lake. I don't know how to explain it better than that. I've always sort of, he stopped. Started again. When people are lying, or performing, or saying what they think they're supposed to say, there's a quality to it. Like a note that's slightly off pitch. I notice it. I always noticed it, even before Monday. I just didn't have a name for why. Fleur was looking at him with an expression that was entirely her own, entirely unarchitected. That must be, she said, carefully, both very useful and very lonely. The word landed exactly right, which startled him slightly. He looked at her. Yes, he said. Both of those. She nodded once, as if filing something important. Then she straightened, and some of the architecture came back, not all of it, but enough to stand in public with. I wanted to say, she said, that what you did yesterday was extraordinary. Not the result. The choice. Walking toward a creature that could kill you with nothing raised, she paused. It was the right thing. And it was brave in the specific way that brave needs to be, which is that it required understanding the situation truly before acting on it. She met his eyes. I respect it. Coming from Fleur Delacour, Harry understood, I respect it was not a small thing. It was a declaration with full weight behind it, offered deliberately and without qualification. Thank you, he said. And then, you were excellent yesterday too. The sleeping charm under pressure, with a crowd that size, that requires extraordinary concentration. I was singed, she said. Slightly singed, he said. You were still elegant. The almost smile again. This time it stayed a beat longer. Don't flatter me, she said. I don't, Harry said. I told you what I saw. She looked at him for one more moment, with those grey eyes that were doing something complex and private, and then she turned and walked back toward the castle, her robes moving cleanly around her ankles in the morning air, not looking back. Harry stayed at the boathouse for a while. Watched the squid retract its tentacle. Thought about pitch and resonance and what it meant when someone said the exact right word for what you'd been carrying without knowing you were carrying it. Lonely. Yes. And then, recently, less so. He walked back to the castle. He had a letter to write before breakfast. The letter was to Sirius, because Sirius needed to know everything and Harry trusted him with everything, and also because writing to Sirius was one of the few places Harry let himself be completely honest without editing. He wrote 3 pages, which was long for a letter sent by bird, and covered the declaration, the colonies, the legal situation, the dragon task, the ministry owl, Draco's information, and Hermione's documentation work, and at the end he wrote, I feel like something's come into focus. I don't know how to explain it better than that. I know you'd understand if you could see it. I wish you could see it. He sent it with Hedwig, who took the weight of 3 pages with the slightly martyred dignity of an owl who finds the postal volume excessive but loves the sender too much to complain effectively. Hermione was in the library when Harry found her after breakfast, which was where Hermione was whenever she was not required by law to be somewhere else. She had acquired, since yesterday, additional books and a second scroll of notes, and she was in a state of focused intensity that made the table around her look occupied by an entire research team. Sit down, she said without looking up. I found something. Harry sat. The 1784 documents. Those two. But first, she put down her quill and looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has found something so significant they've been waiting since they found it for the right moment to say it, and this is now that moment. I found records of the last emperor. The one Evangeline's ancestor knew. His name was Aldrich, and he was, she paused. Harry, he was British. Harry blinked. He was born in a wizarding family in Northumberland in 1687. Both parents were wizards, as far as the records show, which means the bloodline was already well embedded in a wizarding line by then. He emerged the same way. A Veela elder recognized the aura when he was a young man. He was, she checked her notes. He was a champion of something. The records are vague about what, specifically, but the word used is tournament. He was competing in some kind of magical competition when the recognition happened. The silence between them had a specific quality to it. "Don't," Harry said. "I'm not saying anything," Hermione said. "You're thinking very loudly." "I'm just noting the structural parallel," Hermione said, with entirely too much innocence. "Right." Harry rubbed his face. "The 1784 documents." "Yes. Back to business, the relief of solid ground. The formatting is wrong. The seal used on the document Fudge's people will supposedly produce. I found 3 examples of actual 1784 ministry documents in the public ICW archive. The seal used in that period had a specific imperfection, a small notch in the lower left of the crown's third spike. It was an artifact of the particular die used from 1779 to 1791. Any forgery made in the present day would need to replicate that specific imperfection to be convincing, and it's not documented anywhere in public records. Meaning, if their forgery doesn't have it, we know, Harry said. And if it does, then someone with access to original period documents made the forgery, which narrows the field considerably. She tapped her quill on the table. I've also written to the French Ministry's historical office, not officially, just as a Hogwarts student researching Veela history, asking if they have records of any trade agreements with the British Ministry in the period 1780 to 1790. She paused. If they don't respond, that's interesting. If they respond saying there's no record, we have that in writing. Harry looked at her. The morning light through the library windows was catching the particular brightness of her eyes that appeared when she was operating at full power. Hermione, he said. You are brilliant. I know, she said, and the rare, unguarded version of her smile appeared briefly. But it's nice when you say it. I mean it, Harry said. Genuinely. The smile stayed a moment longer than usual. I know that too, she said, quietly. Then, brisk again, I need Evangeline's Veela records this afternoon. Can you arrange that? Already arranged, Harry said. She's expecting you at 3. Hermione blinked. When did you? This morning before breakfast, Harry said. I sent her a note. She stared at him for a moment with the expression that had been appearing more and more frequently on her face, the one that was recalibrating. You've changed, she said. Not critically. Observationally, with a careful kind of wonder. I know what I am, Harry said. I think that's most of it. Once you know what you are, you can just, he searched for the right word. Act from it. Instead of around it. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly, the nod of someone absorbing something they'll be thinking about for a while. Ron said something similar this morning, she said. He said it's like you were always standing at an angle and now you're just standing straight. Harry considered this. That's a good way to put it, actually. Don't tell him that, Hermione said. He'll be insufferable. Ron, at that particular moment, was in the corridor outside the library having an extremely pointed conversation with Seamus Finnegan, who had told someone else that Harry's first task score had to be rigged, and Ron was explaining, with the particular focused intensity of someone whose loyalty had weight and edges, exactly why that was both wrong and unacceptable. The conversation ended with Seamus looking somewhat abashed and Ron looking like someone who has spent a useful 5 minutes. He came into the library, dropped into the chair across from Harry, and looked at the table covered in Hermione's research. What are we doing? Building a legal case, Harry said. Against the Ministry. Against Fudge specifically. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then, my dad is going to have a very complicated reaction to this. How do you think he'll land? Harry asked. It wasn't casual, he genuinely wanted to know. Arthur Weasley's position mattered, not politically but personally. Ron thought about it seriously, which was one of the things Harry appreciated most about Ron. When something was actually important, Ron turned it over carefully before speaking. "He'll land on you," Ron said finally. "He's always thought the Ministry was, he loves his job, but he's not under any illusions about what Fudge runs." He paused. "He'll probably want to help. He's got access to Ministry records that." "No," Harry said immediately. "I'm not putting your dad at risk." Ron looked at him. "He can decide that for himself." "He can," Harry said. "But I'm not going to ask him. If he offers, that's different. But I'm not asking." He held Ron's gaze. "He has a family. He has a job. The information we need, we can get through Hermione's routes and through Veela records. We don't need to put people at risk who don't have to be." Ron was quiet for a moment. Something in his expression was complicated, a private, specific kind of emotion that Harry had seen before and recognized as the feeling Ron got when Harry did something that reminded him why their friendship was what it was. "Right," Ron said, his voice slightly different. "Right, okay. Tell your dad what's happening, though," Harry said. "He should know. Just so he can make his own choices." Ron nodded. He picked up one of Hermione's reference books, opened it at random, and began to read with the focused commitment of someone with no particular prior interest in Veela legal history who had decided it was now interesting. Which was, Harry thought, its own kind of loyalty. The Death Eater made his move that afternoon. Harry didn't know about it until the evening, and he learned it not through dramatic revelation but through the quiet, specific way that information moved when someone was trying to stop it from moving. Neville came to find him before dinner, Neville who was pale and slightly shaking and had the look of someone who has seen something they're not supposed to have seen and is trying to decide what to do with it. "I was in the grounds," Neville said. "Near the greenhouses. And there was, a man. Not a student, not a teacher. He was disillusioned but he bumped against the greenhouse frame and I saw the shimmer." He swallowed. "He was watching the windows of the Beauxbatons wing. With something in his hand. Small and dark. I didn't know what it was." Harry looked at him. "Did he see you?" "I don't think so. I went back through the greenhouse and came straight to find you." "You did the right thing," Harry said, and he meant it fully. Neville straightened slightly, the particular straightening of someone who doesn't receive direct, uncomplicated validation often enough and feels its effect clearly when it comes. "Stay with Ron and Hermione tonight. Don't go to the greenhouses alone for a while." "What was it?" Neville asked. "The thing he was holding?" "I don't know yet," Harry said. "But I'm going to find out." He went to find Dumbledore, but Dumbledore was not in his office. The gargoyle confirmed the headmaster was in a meeting with the other heads and would not be available for an hour. Harry considered waiting. Decided against it. He went to find Moody instead. Moody's office was on the 4th floor, and his magical eye was, as always, tracking through the door before Harry knocked. The door opened before his hand reached the wood. "Potter." Moody's voice was a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. He was standing at his desk, his magical eye rotating in its socket, and he looked at Harry with an assessment that was total and rapid and professional. "You've got something. Disillusioned individual on the grounds this afternoon," Harry said. "Watching the Beauxbatons wing. Carrying something small and dark that I haven't identified. My source is reliable and was in proximity." Moody was already moving, lifting his staff from the wall, reaching for his traveling cloak. "Where exactly?" "East greenhouses. Near the second frame." "When?" "An hour ago." Moody was at the door. He stopped and looked back at Harry with both eyes, the real one, sharp and faded blue, and the magical one, which had locked onto Harry's face with the particular focus he'd noticed before. "You didn't wait for Dumbledore." "He's unavailable for an hour," Harry said. An hour is time for someone to have moved, destroyed evidence, or done whatever they came to do. Moody looked at him for a long moment with something that might have been approval if it had been less weathered. "Come with me," he said. "Keep up." Harry kept up. They found the spot Neville had described, the second greenhouse frame, east side, a narrow passage between the stone wall and the glass, and Moody moved through it with the systematic attention of someone who had spent decades reading ground for the presence of things that didn't want to be found. Harry stood at the passage entrance and kept his wand out and his awareness wide and felt the ground with whatever sense had been getting sharper since Monday. There was residue. He could feel it, not see it, not smell it, but sense it in the particular way he was beginning to understand was his, a kind of aura reading that registered intention as much as physical presence. Someone had been here with ill intent, with the specific cold purposefulness of someone on a mission. And they had left, not long ago. Something was set here, Moody said, crouching near the base of the wall. Small. Activated recently. He reached into his coat and took out a sequence of detection instruments Harry didn't recognize, running them over the stones. Dark magic residue. Recent. Strong. What kind? Surveillance first, Moody said. Could escalate from there. He looked at the Beauxbatons wing windows, visible from this position. High angle. Best view of the wing is the second floor. Madame Delacour's rooms are second floor. Harry felt something move in him that wasn't anger, exactly, but was in the same territory, a hard, clear, protective response, clean as a blade. They're targeting Evangeline. Or the delegation generally, Moody said. Or you through them. He stood, his leg clicking. The Emperor Declaration makes you valuable to some people and dangerous to others. The dangerous side moves faster. He looked at Harry with his real eye, the faded blue one that had seen more of the dark than most people could imagine. This is Death Eater work. The residue pattern, I know, Harry said. Moody looked at him. You're not surprised. Voldemort's been watching since Monday, Harry said. He was going to move eventually. He held Moody's gaze. The Emperor bloodline unites magical factions. That's what Hermione's research says. It's historically what emperors did. That's a catastrophe for someone who wants those factions divided and afraid. Moody was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone revising their assessment of a person with considerable upward adjustment. The delegation needs to be secured, he said. I'll speak to Evangeline, Harry said. She won't want ministry-assigned protection. No, Moody agreed. She wouldn't. He paused. There's another option. The school wards. Can Dumbledore add specific protection for the Beauxbatons wing? He can anchor additional wards to a secondary key, Moody said. If the key holder has sufficient magical density to anchor them. He looked at Harry with his magical eye. An Emperor aura would be sufficient. Considerably more than sufficient. Harry absorbed this. How does that work? Dumbledore will explain the mechanics. The short version is that you give a thread of your aura to the ward working and it anchors to you rather than the stone. Means only your direct death breaks it. He paused, and something in his expression was difficult to read. It's permanent. Once set. Then we do it tonight, Harry said. Moody looked at him for a long moment. You don't hesitate, he said. Not approvingly, not disapprovingly, observationally, the way a man who has seen many people in their critical moments catalogues responses. There are people in that wing who are there because of me, Harry said. Because of what I am and what that means to the people who want to stop it. He put his wand away. I don't hesitate about things that are clearly mine to do. They walked back to the castle in the thin November evening, and Moody was quiet beside him, and Harry was quiet, and between them was the comfortable silence of two people who are in agreement about what the night's work would be. Dumbledore was back in his office when they arrived, and Harry laid out everything, Neville's account, the ground residue, Moody's assessment, the proposed ward anchoring, in clear, linear sequence, without embellishment, which was the most efficient way to brief someone intelligent. Dumbledore listened with the focused stillness of someone for whom listening is a skill rather than a habit, and when Harry had finished he sat for a moment with his hands together. "The ward anchoring," Dumbledore said. "You're certain?" "Yes," Harry said. "The permanence of," "I understand what permanent means," Harry said. Not rudely. Just clearly. Dumbledore looked at him with those deep blue eyes. "Very well," he said. "And then, quietly, I am sorry that the target on your back has expanded to include those around you." "It was always going to," Harry said. "The people I care about have always been in the path of whatever's coming for me." He stood. "The difference now is I have something to do about it. So I'm going to do it." They worked the ward anchoring an hour later, Dumbledore, Harry, and the castle itself, which cooperated with the working in the way that Hogwarts cooperated with important magic, as though it remembered what it had been built to protect. Harry held out his wand and felt the request come from Dumbledore's working, a gentle pull asking for a thread of what he was, and he gave it without reservation, and the thread ran out of him like a plumb line and hit the stonework of the Beauxbaton's wing and settled there, warm and gold and permanent, and the wards that closed around it had a quality that was different from the usual castle wards. They were warmer, somehow, and the warmth was his. When it was done, he felt not diminished but more present somehow, as though the thing he'd given hadn't left him but had extended outward from him, like a root that had reached further into ground. He told Evangeline that night. She listened without interrupting, which was not her default mode, and when he had finished she was quiet for a moment and then she said, in French, something brief and low. Fleur translated, from her chair in the corner where she'd been during the conversation. She says she should not be surprised and she is not surprised but she is." Fleur paused, and her voice was slightly different. "Moved. She is moved." Harry looked at Evangeline, who was looking at him with her wintermoon eyes full of something ancient and warm and complicated, and he said, "Tell her the wards are permanent. Whatever happens, they hold." Fleur translated. Evangeline listened, and then she reached out and placed one hand briefly, lightly, on Harry's forearm, the same gesture she might have made to her own grandchildren, warm and direct, and said something. "She says," Fleur said, "that the true measure of sovereignty is what you protect. Not what you command." Harry held the old woman's gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Later, walking back through the corridor toward Gryffindor Tower, Fleur walked beside him. The castle was quiet around them, the deep quiet of late evening, most students already in their common rooms. "She hasn't touched someone like that in a long time," Fleur said. "Grandmother. She's formal with almost everyone." "She's formal with me too," Harry said. "That was different." "Yes," Fleur said. "It was." She was quiet for a moment. "You warded the building because of Neville's account. You didn't wait to be sure. You didn't ask someone else to assess whether it was important enough." "I was sure," Harry said. "The residue Moody found confirmed it." "You moved before confirmation," she said. "On the account of a nervous student and your own," she searched for the word. "Your own reading of what was there." "Yes," he said. "That requires," she paused. "Trusting yourself. Considerably." He looked at her. "Don't you trust yourself?" Fleur considered this with the honesty she'd been bringing to all her words this evening. "In competition, yes. In my skills, my magic, my judgment about Beauxbaton's matters." She paused. "But in larger things, things where the cost of being wrong is other people," her voice was precise and unapologetic. "I am more careful." "Being careful isn't wrong," Harry said. "Being so careful you don't move in time is," she said, and looked at him steadily, and he understood she was not describing a flaw in herself abstractly but something specific and maybe painful. He didn't push it. He left it where she put it, the way you leave something someone has set down deliberately. "You know what I was thinking about this morning?" he said, after a moment. "What?" "The egg. The clue." He glanced at her. I think it's mere people. The screaming, above water it's awful, but underwater, language, Fleur said immediately, her voice sharpening with the interest of someone whose mind moves fast when it's engaged. It's a language. The pitch changes completely when you account for medium, Harry said. You've been thinking about the second task, she said. For the last 2 days, yeah. She was quiet for a moment. I hadn't worked it out yet. I haven't fully worked it out either, he said. I know what it is, not how. Gillyweed, she said. Or a bubblehead charm. For the water. Both have complications, Harry said. Gillyweed duration. Bubblehead charm maintenance under pressure. There's a third option, Fleur said. She paused. I'm not going to tell you what it is. We're competing, Harry said, amused. Yes, she said, and smiled, fully, this time, the real smile that changed her whole face and that Harry suspected very few people got to see. We are. They had arrived at the junction where their routes diverged, her path to the Beauxbatons wing, his to Gryffindor Tower. They both stopped. The wards, Fleur said. Thank you. On behalf of, you don't have to thank me, Harry said. They're mine to set. He paused. The people in that wing matter to me. Your grandmother matters to me. That's straightforward. She looked at him with that particular quality of attention she'd been developing over the last few days, the kind that wasn't study anymore but something more personal than study. You're going to change things, she said. Not just in Veela law. In Britain. Probably, Harry said. That frightens a lot of people. Some people, he agreed. Not you. She considered that. Not me, she confirmed, and there was something in how she said it that was its own kind of declaration. He nodded. Turned toward Gryffindor Tower. Potter, she said. He looked back. The thing I said yesterday, she said. At the task. That you didn't ask about. He waited. I said, Fleur said, precisely, with the composure of someone choosing to lower a drawbridge deliberately rather than having it fall, that it shouldn't be possible but everything about him is real. Real. She held his gaze. I said you were real. The corridor was quiet. The torches burned low and warm. I heard, Harry said. I know you heard, she said. I wanted you to know I'd decided it. He looked at her for a moment in the torchlight, this complicated, formidable, revising her assumptions person who had met him at the boathouse at 7 in the morning to have an honest conversation and had just, at the end of a full and complicated day, chosen to give him something she could have kept. So did I, he said. And turned and walked to the tower, and he could feel her gaze on his back for the length of the corridor. In the dungeons, Severus Snape sat at his desk and looked at a vial of potion he'd brewed that afternoon. Dark magic detection reagent, specific to the residue pattern Moody had described after their brief, clipped exchange in the corridor. The pattern matched 6 recorded Death Eater operational signatures, 2 of them individuals Snape knew personally. He wrote a name on a piece of parchment. Folded it. Set it on the corner of his desk. He thought about Lily Evans, who had fire that nobody had understood. He thought about her son, who had anchored wards to himself tonight like it was a reasonable evening activity, as though giving pieces of yourself permanently to the protection of others was simply the obvious thing to do. He picked up the parchment with the name on it and went to find Dumbledore. The fire in his grate burned gold for a moment as he left the room, which was unusual, and there was nobody there to see it. Chapter 5 Parliament of Magic. The Ministry's formal summons arrived on a Thursday morning, 9 days after the first task, carried by 6 owls simultaneously, which was the bureaucratic equivalent of a raised voice. 6 owls because the summons was addressed 6 ways, to Harry Potter, to Albus Dumbledore as Hogwarts headmaster, to Madame Holland Maxime as Beauxbatons headmistress, to Madame Evangeline Delacour as declared witness, to the ICW's British Liaison Office, and to the Wisengamot's Clerk of Records. 6 copies of the same document, each sealed with the full ministry crest, each bearing Cornelius Fudge's personal signature in the large, looping hand of a man who understood that how your name looked on official documents was a form of power. Harry read his copy over breakfast without changing expression. The summons cited 3 grounds for the convened hearing: first, unauthorized invocation of defunct magical law; second, potential misrepresentation of bloodline heritage in a context designed to influence the Triwizard tournament standings; third, disruption of established magical governance frameworks. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday at the Ministry of Magic, in Courtroom 3. Courtroom 3. Harry remembered Courtroom 10 from Dumbledore's Pensieve. The Ministry built its courtrooms to feel like things had already been decided before you sat down. He folded the summons and tucked it into his bag. They cited tournament influence, Hermione said, from beside him. She'd received a copy of his copy somehow, which Harry suspected was Evangeline's work. That's clever, actually. It's not their strongest ground legally, but it positions the Emperor Declaration as self-serving rather than genuine. It's a credibility argument dressed as a legal one. I know, Harry said. And Courtroom 3 isn't. They usually use 3 for matters of significant public interest. It seats more observers. Which means, they want an audience, Ron said flatly. They want to make a public spectacle of telling Harry he's nothing. Not nothing, Hermione corrected. They want to publicly define the limits of what he is. Which is the same as controlling it. She tapped her quill against her notepad, fast, the way she did when she was thinking hard. But it cuts both ways. A public hearing means a public record. Everything said in Courtroom 3 is archived. If we demonstrate fraud in a public courtroom, it's not a private dispute anymore. Harry looked at the table. He was thinking about something Evangeline had said, that the Emperor line had no tolerance for performance, that the aura read intent before action. He was thinking about a ministry courtroom, which was built entirely from performance and procedure and the architecture of institutional authority. He was thinking about what happened when something completely real walked into a room designed entirely around appearance. I need to talk to Evangeline, he said. She was in the courtyard, their courtyard now, by unspoken mutual agreement, the flagstone space by the east entrance where the first real conversation had happened. She was sitting on the low wall with her walking stick across her knees, her face turned toward the weak winter sun, looking like someone who had been sitting in winter sun for a very long time and had made a philosophy of it. She opened her eyes when she heard him, which meant she'd known he was coming before she heard him, which was its own kind of communication. You read the summons, she said. What have you got? Harry asked. She reached into her coat and withdrew a slim, dark-covered document, which she held out with the particular satisfaction of someone who has been waiting for the right moment to produce a thing. The Registre Souverain, she said. The Sovereign Register. Original copy. It has been in my family's keeping since the last emperor gave it to my ancestor. She paused. It contains the complete record of recognized emperors, their declarations, and the legal instruments established under their authority. Going back 900 years. Harry took it carefully. It was lighter than it should have been and warmer, and opening it felt like opening something that was aware of being opened. The entries were in multiple languages and several that weren't quite languages anymore, Old French, Old Latin, and something else that Harry's eyes seemed to understand even though his brain couldn't translate it. The last entry was dated 1693. Aldrich of Northumberland. Declared before 5 colony elders. Registration witnessed and sealed. Below it, a blank space. Below the blank space, a new entry in ink that was still wet-looking, though Evangeline had clearly written it days ago. The ink had the gold warmth of the trace loom. Harry James Potter. Declared at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, November 1, 1994. Recognized by Evangeline Marie Delacour, elder of the Delacour line. Confirmed by Seraphine Aldebert, elder of the lawyer colony. Registration witnessed and sealed. Harry looked at it for a long moment. The register is legally inviolable, Evangeline said. Under the Veela Sovereign Accords and under ICW Foundational Charter. It cannot be disputed, altered, or overruled by any subsequent legislation. It is the oldest continuous legal document in the magical world. She paused. Fudge's people don't know we have it. Harry looked up. They don't know about it at all. The Ministry knows the Accords exist. They know the general historical framework. But the register itself, its existence, its preservation, its location, that knowledge has been held within Veela elder lines exclusively. Her winter moon eyes were steady and certain. They are walking into a courtroom to dispute something they believe to be historical memory and oral tradition. We are walking in with 900 years of continuous, witnessed, sealed legal record. Harry thought about Fudge's 3 grounds. Unauthorized invocation. Misrepresentation. Disruption of governance. The register answers all 3, he said. The register obliterates all 3, Evangeline said, with a precision that was absolute and possibly slightly gleeful under the surface. The invocation was not unauthorized because the authority was never revoked, only dormant. The declaration was not misrepresentation because it is recorded and sealed in a document older than the Ministry itself. And as for disruption of governance, she paused. You cannot disrupt something that was never, legally, within its scope. They'll argue the ICW Charter superseded the Accords, Harry said, thinking ahead. That the 1689 founding implicitly dissolved all prior sovereign claims. They can argue it, Evangeline said. But the Charter explicitly preserves prior recognized sovereign claims. Article 7, Clause 3. I have the original text. Harry looked at her. She looked like someone who had prepared for this specific fight for 30 years and had done it carefully and thoroughly and with considerable pleasure. You've been ready for this, he said. Since the day I understood what I was keeping, she said simply. I am the last elder old enough to have been briefed directly by someone who knew Aldrich. The chain of preparation runs unbroken. She paused. I just needed the Emperor to walk back into the room. Harry thought about a 14-year-old boy in a school corridor, with fire in his blood that nobody had told him about, walking into a wand-weighing ceremony on a Monday in November. Bit of timing, he said. The corner of Evangeline's mouth curved. Yes, she said. Bit of timing. Hermione's meeting with Evangeline that afternoon produced, in short order, the complete Veela records cross-reference she'd been building, confirmation of the seal imperfection in original 1784 documents, and a letter from the French Ministry's Historical Office, arrived that morning, prompt and thorough, confirming that their archive contained no record whatsoever of any trade agreement with the British Ministry in the period 1780 to 1800. The letter was signed by 3 archivists and notarized. Hermione looked at it for a full 30 seconds without speaking. Then she said, to Evangeline, in careful French, Madam, you are extraordinary. Evangeline replied in French. Hermione blinked. She says she knows, she told Harry. I know, Harry agreed. The weekend before the hearing was a strange, coiled thing, the castle running on its normal rhythms, lessons and meals and the low social weather of 400 teenagers, while underneath all of it ran the current of the hearing, Monday, the Ministry. Harry moved through the weekend with the grounded clarity that had become his default, but there was something additional now, a focused readiness, the state you entered when something important was close and you had done your preparation and now the only thing left was to meet it. He trained. Not magically, physically, in the early mornings, running the castle perimeter in the dark with the cold November air sharp in his lungs, because there was something clarifying about physical exertion that he discovered at Privet Drive and never stopped needing. He ran and thought and let the thoughts settle into their natural order. He sparred with Moody on Saturday, which was a different kind of clarifying. Moody was a brutal and precise teacher, which Harry had come to understand was not cruelty but respect, the respect of someone who believed you could take the full weight of what he had to teach and was willing to give it to you. They worked in one of the empty 4th-floor classrooms, furniture pushed back, Moody calling out curses and counter-curses in his gravel and concrete voice, and Harry moving through them with the fluid speed that had been growing since the first task, something in his reflexes sharpened by the same process that had put fire in his palm and deepened his ability to read rooms. After an hour, Moody called a halt and looked at Harry with both eyes, the real one and the magical one, which was doing something Harry had come to recognize as its version of deep assessment. "You're faster than you were 2 weeks ago," Moody said. "I know," Harry said. "Not just reflexes. Decision speed." Moody lowered his wand. "Most young wizards hesitate at the choice point. Act or wait, attack or defend. You've stopped hesitating." "I know what I'm defending," Harry said. "That makes it clearer." Moody was quiet for a moment. "The hearing," he said. "Monday," Harry said. "Fudge will have people there. Beyond the official proceeding, people in the gallery, people prepared to speak, people positioned to shape the narrative regardless of what the legal outcome is." He looked at Harry. "The hearing can go perfectly and you can still lose the day if the room's impression is what they want it to be." "I know," Harry said. "That's why I'm not going to argue the case in the way they've framed it." Moody raised his eyebrow. "The real one." "Meaning?" "They've structured the hearing to be about whether my claim is valid," Harry said. "Whether the evidence is sufficient, whether the law applies, whether Evangeline's declaration meets the standard." He paused. "I'm not going to fight that argument. I'm going to make it irrelevant." Moody looked at him for a long moment. His magical eye had stopped rotating. "You're not going to defend," Moody said. "You're going to, I'm going to be what I am," Harry said simply. "In a room full of people who've been told what I am is debatable." He met the old Auror's gaze. "The register, the French records, Hermione's documentation, that's Evangeline's case. She'll make it brilliantly. My job is different." "What's your job?" Harry picked up his bag. "Show up." Moody looked at him for a beat. Then he made a sound that was the nearest thing to a laugh that his voice could apparently produce, which was somewhere between a bark and a rockslide, and he turned back to his desk and said, over his shoulder, "Constant vigilance, Potter." "Always," Harry said, and left. Sunday evening, the night before the hearing, Harry sat in the common room long after the fire had burned down and most people had gone to bed. Ron had stayed up with him for a while, then fallen asleep in his chair in the classical Ron fashion. Hermione had gone to bed late, her notes organized into perfect order in a leather folio she'd acquired specifically for the purpose. Harry sat with the Registre Souverain in his lap and turned pages slowly, not reading but feeling, the weight of names going back 900 years, the accumulated record of people who had been what he was and had done what it meant to do it. Aldrich of Northumberland, 1693. Before him, a woman named Isabel in 1587. Before her, a man named Devereux in 1441. Before them, names that went back into the old languages, into the forms that pre-existed nations. All of them had been ordinary people first. He could tell, not from what was written but from what wasn't, from the simple human fact of a name and a date and a witnessing, the understatement of a record that just said recognized without describing the morning it happened, the shock and the settling and the slow understanding of what it meant. He turned to his own entry. The wet gold ink that was somehow still fresh. Harry James Potter. He sat with it. Outside the common room windows, the grounds were dark and the lake was still and the sky over Scotland was doing something brilliant with stars. He looked at his reflection in the glass, a 14-year-old boy with untidy hair and round glasses and a scar that had defined him for as long as he could remember, and he thought about the boathouse, Fleur saying lonely with the precision of someone giving him the right word for something he'd been carrying without a name. Less lonely now. But not because the aloneness of it had changed, it was still his, the specific weight of being what he was, but because the weight itself had changed from burden to belonging. He was not alone in it. He was alone with it, which was different. He closed the register. He looked at the dark window. He went to bed. Monday arrived grey and cold and absolutely certain of itself. They traveled to the ministry by Fleur, Harry, Dumbledore, Evangeline, and a delegation that included Hermione, who had informed Harry she was attending as his personal research assistant and had produced documentation for this designation that she had apparently prepared in anticipation of someone trying to exclude her. Nobody tried to exclude her. The documentation was very thorough. The ministry atrium in the early morning had the specific quality of institutional life, purposeful people moving with practiced efficiency, the low hum of a large machine running its programs, the tall golden fountain at the center throwing light up into the high ceiling. Magical maintenance were doing something to the ceiling enchantments. An aura patrol moved past, crisp and alert. Harry stepped out of the flue and straightened his jacket and stood. Several people stopped. It wasn't his doing, he hadn't projected anything, hadn't raised anything, hadn't performed. But the Emperor aura was apparently something that registered at close range even to people who had no framework for what they were registering, because the atrium underwent a small but distinct change in attention, the way a room changes when a fire is lit in it, the quality of the air becoming warmer and more present. He walked toward courtroom 3. People made way. He didn't ask them to. Cornelius Fudge was already in the courtroom when they arrived, which meant he'd gotten there early, which meant the early arrival was itself a statement. He was standing near the front bench with 2 ministry officials Harry didn't recognize and a wizard in Wisengamot robes whose name Harry had seen on Hermione's research, Dorian Avery, a Wisengamot member with a 20-year record of institutional conservatism and 3 documented connections to pre-Reformation Death Eater sympathizers. Fudge saw Harry come in and did something with his expression that was trying to be welcoming and landing somewhere between wary and assessing. He was a round-faced man with a lime-green bowler hat and the air of someone who had spent years building a careful edifice and was now watching weather approach it. "Mr. Potter," he said warmly. "I'm glad you could, Minister," Harry said, and crossed the room to stand before the bench that had been designated for his side, and he did not shake Fudge's hand or respond to the warmth, and he did it without being rude, he simply went to where he was going, because he had somewhere to be, and it was not an extended greeting with Cornelius Fudge. He heard Fudge's intake of breath behind him. Heard Avery mutter something. He didn't turn. Evangeline arrived at his shoulder, took in the courtroom in her single comprehensive sweep, and sat down with the composure of someone who has been in more serious rooms than this one and has never yet been the least important person in any of them. The gallery was full. That was the first thing Harry registered when he actually looked at it, packed, every row, with a range of people that told a story about the ministry's intentions. Journalists, more than the prophet, international ones he didn't recognize, quick quotes quills bristling from 3 different sections. Wisengamot members in plum robes. And in the back rows, a contingent of people who weren't journalists or officials, who were there for a specific reason Harry read in their posture and their stillness, Veela. A dozen at least, in their human forms, watching with the amber and silver and gold eyes of old magic, perfectly silent. Seraphine was in the front row of the gallery. She met Harry's eyes and nodded once, with the precision of someone marking that the moment had been noted. The hearing opened with procedural formality. The Wisengamot's chief warlock, Tiberius Ogden, whom Harry recognized from the pensive, a lean old man with sharp eyes and the careful neutrality of someone trying very hard to run a fair proceeding, establishing the grounds and calling the parties to order. Fudge's advocate rose first. A ministry solicitor named Grayson, compact and precise, with the manner of someone who has won a great many hearings by making complicated things appear simple. He laid out the ministry's case with genuine skill. The declaration, he argued, had been made under emotional circumstances by an elderly woman with clear personal investment in the outcome. The Veela sovereign accords, whatever their historical interest, had been rendered obsolete by 3 centuries of subsequent magical governance legislation. The bloodline claim required independent magical verification, not merely the testimony of interested parties. And the timing, occurring at a tournament where Mr. Potter's standings were directly affected, raised questions about motivation that the Wisengamot was surely well placed to address. It was a good case. Not a brilliant one, but a good one, and delivered well. Harry sat through it without expression. When Grayson finished, Ogden looked to Harry's side. Madame Delacour. Evangeline rose. She was small, Harry thought again, and she took up so much space. She spoke for 12 minutes. She did not use notes. She spoke in French, which she had informed the court beforehand she intended to do with translation provided by her granddaughter, which had produced mild objections that she had ignored with the complete, untroubled calm of someone who has decided what language she will speak in and is not interested in further discussion of the matter. Fleur translated, standing slightly behind and to her grandmother's left, her voice clear and precise and matching her grandmother's cadence with the ease of long practice. Evangeline began with the register. She placed it on the table in front of her, and she described it, its age, its provenance, its continuous chain of custody, the witnessing protocols for each entry, the legal instruments that governed its authority. She described Article 7, Clause 3 of the ICW Foundational Charter in the original Latin, which she recited from memory without inflection and with the quality of someone speaking a language they have known since childhood. She laid the French ministry letter on the table. She laid Hermione's documentation on the table. She laid 3 original 1784 ministry documents, obtained, Harry had been amazed to learn, from the Beauxbatons Historical Archive, which had been accumulating British ministry documents for diplomatic purposes since the 16th century, and pointed to the seal imperfection with a small magnifying instrument and said, in measured French, "Any document produced by the ministry today purporting to show an 1784 dissolution of the Veela sovereign accords may be examined against these originals. If the seal imperfection is absent, the document is a forgery. If it is present, the French ministry's notarized confirmation of no corresponding record renders it legally void regardless." Grayson had gone quite still. Fudge, in his seat, had turned the color of something that had been left in the sun too long. Avery leaned over and said something into Fudge's ear, quick and low. Fudge shook his head, very slightly, the shake of someone being told their contingency plan has developed a significant problem. The document they'd prepared, Harry knew, from Draco's information, would have the seal. They'd done their research that far. But they hadn't known about the French records. They hadn't known about the Beauxbatons archive. Nobody had known about the Beauxbatons archive, it emerged, because Evangeline had placed the documents there herself, 30 years ago, as insurance. Ogden was reading the French letter. His expression was carefully neutral but his eyes were doing something precise and unhappy. Evangeline sat down. Ogden said, "Mr. Potter." And then paused. "Do you wish to address the Wiesengemot?" Harry stood. The courtroom did the thing the atrium had done, the small, involuntary shift in quality, the sense of something settling into sharper focus. In the gallery, the Veela contingent was perfectly motionless. In the front row, Seraphine was watching him with amber eyes that had been waiting for this moment for 60 years. Harry looked at the Wiesengemot bench. 43 witches and wizards in plum robes, ranging from Ogden's careful fair-mindedness to Avery's rigid hostility, with everything between. 43 people who had come here today expecting to rule on a question. "I'm not here to ask you to recognize what I am," Harry said. The room went very quiet. Madame Delacour has presented the legal record thoroughly, and that record speaks for itself. The documentation is complete. The precedents are established. There's nothing I need to add to the legal argument because the legal argument is already won. He paused. What I want to say is something different. He looked at Fudge. Fudge met his gaze with the practiced steadiness of a politician who has sat across from difficult people in difficult rooms for a long time, and Harry felt the intent underneath the steadiness, the careful, methodical machinery of a man who had decided this threat needed to be neutralized and was still, even now, running calculations about how to do it. "I understand what concerns you," Harry said, directly to Fudge, and he meant it without hostility and without contempt. "You've built something. A structure. It works in a particular way and it depends on certain assumptions about where authority comes from and how it moves. I am not what you assumed, and that makes the structure uncertain." He paused. "But here's what I need you to understand. I'm not interested in dismantling what you've built. I'm not interested in governance or administration or the daily running of magical Britain. The emperor role isn't a political office. It never was. He turned to address the full bench. The Veela sovereign accords gave the emperor authority over Veela matters. Specifically, protection from persecution, arbitration of disputes, legal standing for communities that the wizarding establishment has historically ignored or exploited. He let that sit for a moment. The Veela colonies in Britain have no legal representation in this body. They have no mechanism for redress when wizarding interests damage their communities. They have no standing in any court. That is what the emperor designation addresses. Not ministry governance. Not Wisengamot authority. A gap in protection that has existed for 300 years. He looked at the bench. You can rule today that the accords don't apply. That the bloodline claim is insufficient. That Madame Delacour's declaration has no legal weight. He paused. The register still exists. The French records still show no corresponding dissolution document. The ICW charter still says what it says. You can rule against the law, but you cannot make the law different by ruling against it. Another pause. And every journalist in this gallery will report what they saw Madame Delacour lay on that table today, and the reading public will draw their own conclusions about a ministry that tried to bury 900 years of continuous legal record. Absolute silence. Fudge's jaw was very tight. I'm not asking for a ruling, Harry said. I'm telling you what is true. What you do with it is your business. He sat down. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Ogden said, in a voice that had moved from careful neutral to something more personal, the Wisengamot will recess. They recessed for 40 minutes, which was not how these hearings usually went. Recesses were rare, and a 40-minute one meant something significant was happening in the private chamber. Harry sat at the table and drank water that Hermione appeared with from somewhere and read through sections of the register and felt the low, steady fire in him running even and calm. Fleur came to sit beside him during the recess. Not on the official side of the table, in the chair immediately to his right, which was technically spectator space. She sat and looked at the front of the courtroom and didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, quietly, the way you looked at Fudge. How did I look at him? Harry asked. Like you understood him, she said. Without contempt. I do understand him, Harry said. Most people in your position would have, the anger, she paused. You made him small without making him your enemy. That's, she searched for the word. Sophisticated. 414. I'm not trying to be sophisticated, Harry said. I meant what I said. I understand what he's afraid of. Being afraid of something doesn't make you evil. Fleur looked at him. Even when what you do because of that fear is wrong. Especially then, Harry said. That's the most human thing there is. He paused. Doesn't mean I'm going to let him win. But understanding why he's doing it helps me know what he'll do next. And what will he do next, she asked. Try to find a different angle, Harry said. He'll accept the legal outcome today because he has to. But he'll start working on something else. Something personal, maybe. Something that's not about the accords. He looked at the door to the private chamber. That's when it gets more complicated. You're prepared for more complicated, she said. It was not a question. I've been prepared for more complicated since I was 11 months old, Harry said, with a dryness that surprised her into a genuine short laugh, surprised out of her, genuine rather than offered. The Wisengamot returned. Ogden sat for a moment in the way that a man sits when he has something to say that he has decided to say carefully and completely. He looked at the documentation on the table. He looked at Harry. He looked at Evangeline. The Wisengamot has reviewed the presented documentation, he said. The Registre Souverain has been examined and its authenticity confirmed by our own archival specialist, who has advised that the document is consistent with a continuous record of the claimed age and provenance. He paused. The ICW Charter's explicit preservation of prior sovereign claims has been confirmed as applicable to the Veela Sovereign Accords of 1192. The claim of dissolution in 1784 cannot be substantiated. The documentation presented by the ministry advocate does not bear the period-consistent seal impression found in authenticated documents from the archive produced by the Beauxbatons delegation. Fudge's advocate, Grayson, sat absolutely still. The Wisingamot finds, Ogden said, with the particular weight of someone who knows they are saying something that will be quoted and recorded and argued about for a very long time, that the Veela Sovereign Accords remain legally active under ICW foundational charter protections. That the designation of Harry James Potter as recognized emperor under those accords is valid under the terms of the Registre Souverain and the Witness Declaration Protocol. He paused. The hearing finds in favor of the claimant on all three presented grounds. The gallery erupted. Not chaos, sound, the enormous human sound of a room processing something significant, journalists writing simultaneously, people turning to each other, the Veela contingent in the back rows still and silent amid the noise like stones in a river. Seraphine in the front row had closed her eyes, very briefly. Fudge sat in his chair with the expression of a man watching a carefully constructed edifice develop a crack he'd been told wasn't structural and has now proven to be very structural indeed. He was already thinking, Harry could see it, the rapid private recalculation, the sideways glance at Avery, the small adjustment of his posture into something more contained and more dangerous. Congratulations are somewhat premature, Fudge said, standing, his voice carrying across the noise. He directed it at the room rather than at Harry specifically, which was a political choice. He was speaking to witnesses, not to Harry. The ruling addresses the legal question. The practical questions, of jurisdiction, of implementation, of how any such authority would interface with existing governance structures, those questions remain open. They do, Harry agreed. Fudge looked at him. He'd expected dismissal, perhaps, or a triumphant response he could characterize as arrogance. The simple agreement was harder to work with. We should discuss those questions, Harry said. In a proper forum. With proper representation. He paused. I'll have Madame Delacour's office reach out to yours about scheduling. The implication, that Harry would set the schedule, that the next meeting would happen on his terms, framed in Veela law rather than ministry protocol, was not lost on Fudge or on anyone in the room with enough experience to read it. Fudge's smile was very careful. Of course, he said. On the way out of the courtroom, in the broad corridor outside with the noise of the hearing still audible behind them and journalists closing from three directions, Hermione appeared at Harry's left shoulder with her leather folio and the bright-eyed focused energy of someone who has just watched 3 weeks of preparation pay off in real time. Ron appeared at his right, looking slightly stunned in the way Ron looked when things went dramatically well. You told him the legal argument was already won before Evangeline had even finished presenting it, Hermione said. It was, Harry said. You couldn't have known it would go that cleanly. Evangeline had a document 900 years old and a letter from 3 French archivists, Harry said. And Grayson had a forgery with the wrong seal. He looked at her. The legal argument was always going to go our way. That was never the real fight. Then what was? Ron asked. The room, Harry said. Public perception. Whether people left today thinking the emperor designation was a legal technicality being pushed through by an old woman with an agenda, or whether they left thinking something real had happened. He paused. I wanted them to leave thinking something real had happened. Ron thought about this. Did it work? Harry looked at the journalists moving quickly through the corridor, at the Veela contingent flowing out of the gallery door with the particular purposeful grace of people who had somewhere important to be, at Seraphine pausing briefly to speak to a Wisingamot member who had stopped her with an expression of genuine interest. Look at Seraphine, he said. They looked. The Wisingamot member was listening, actually listening, leaning in slightly, with the focused attention of someone receiving information they hadn't had before. The hearing, Harry said, was always secondary to that conversation. He kept walking. The atrium was thicker with people now, the hearing had ended at midday and the ministry's regular morning traffic had fully populated the space. Harry moved through it with Hermione and Ron flanking him and Evangeline and Fleur a step behind, and the atrium did the thing it had done that morning but amplified now, the shift in quality more pronounced, the ripple of attention moving out from him through the crowd. Someone started clapping. Not everyone. Maybe a dozen people, scattered through the atrium, a young ministry worker near the fountain, 2 older witches near the lifts, an Auror who'd probably been in the gallery. Isolated, uncertain applause, the kind that comes from people who aren't sure whether they're supposed to and are doing it anyway because something moves them to. Harry stopped and looked at them. "Thank you," he said, simply and directly, in the way that acknowledged them without performing for them. He nodded once, and then kept walking. Behind him, Fleur caught Hermione's eye. Hermione, who had known Harry for 3 years and had watched him become something in the last 3 weeks, shrugged slightly with an expression that said, "Yes, I know." Outside the ministry, in the cold London air with the grey sky overhead and the distant ordinary noise of the city they were invisible inside, Evangeline stopped and turned to Harry and looked at him for a moment with her wintermoon eyes full of something he couldn't quite name, something that was bigger than the day, as though she were seeing past the day into the long view she sometimes seemed to occupy. "What?" Harry said. "Nothing," she said. "You did well. That's all." "Evangeline," Harry said, because he'd learned that when she said that's all there was usually more. "What?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, the last emperor, Aldrich, when his hearing came. Before his recognition was challenged by the English crown's magical advisors. They brought him to London, to a room not unlike that one. She looked at the ministry building. He was 22. He had 3 years of preparation. He had the register and 2 colony elders and the full accords behind him. She paused. He was there for 3 days before they acknowledged him. He lost 2 of those days arguing the legal ground before he understood that wasn't where the fight was. She looked at Harry. "You understood in the first 5 minutes." Harry looked at the ministry building. "I've had practice," he said. "Knowing where the real fight is." "Yes," she said. "You have." Something moved in her expression, warm and ancient and very direct. "He would have liked you." Aldrich. He had the same quality. She paused. He said, when they finally acknowledged him, "I was not here to be believed. I was here to be real." Harry looked at her. "He would have liked you very much," she said. Fleur had been standing slightly apart, watching the ministry building with her arms crossed against the cold. She looked at Harry as they turned to walk, and her expression was doing the thing it had been doing more often, fully present, fully unarchitected, giving him the whole of what she was actually thinking. "The next fight," she said. "You said Fudge would find a different angle." "Yes." "Personal," she said. "You said maybe personal." "Maybe," Harry agreed. She held his gaze. "Then be careful," she said, and it was not a general caution, it was specific and direct and weighted with something personal, offered without pretense or qualification. Harry looked at her. "You too," he said, equally specific. She nodded once. And then, because London was cold and they had a flu to catch and a castle to return to and a tournament still running and a dark wizard still planning in the background of everything, they walked back toward the ministry entrance together, all of them, and the grey sky overhead was exactly what it was, and the day was exactly what it had been, and something had shifted permanently in the landscape of magical Britain without anyone firing a single spell. Sometimes that was how the biggest things happened. Chapter 6, The Emperor Stands. The second task was in 2 weeks, and someone had taken Hermione. Harry found out the way the champions found out, through the golden eggs clue, which he'd solved in the bath on the Wednesday after the ministry hearing, lying in the hot water with the egg open and the merpeople's song filling the tiled room with that eerie, beautiful language, and he'd understood it completely on the first full listen, which had surprised him until it hadn't, because of course a language made of water and old magic would read clearly to whatever in him read old magic. "Come seek us where our voices sound, we cannot sing above the ground, and while you're searching, ponder this, we've taken what you'll sorely miss. He'd sat with that for a while. Then he'd gone and told Hermione, and they'd worked through the implications together, someone important, someone the champions would miss, taken and held under the lake for an hour. He'd assumed, at first, that whoever had been chosen for him would be Ron, because Ron was his closest friend and the obvious choice. It wasn't Ron. He found out on the morning of the task itself, when McGonagall knocked on the dormitory door at 5 a.m. and Harry opened it and she was standing in the corridor with an expression that was professionally composed and doing considerable structural work to remain that way. "Miss Granger," she said, "has been selected as your hostage." Harry stood in the doorway for a moment. "She's unharmed," McGonagall said immediately. "She'll be returned, the enchantment is perfectly safe, she's simply in a magically induced sleep on the lake floor, and the moment you retrieve her, where's Ron?" Harry said. "Mr. Weasley has been informed. He wanted to come to you directly but we felt, where is he?" "Common room," McGonagall said. Harry went to the common room. Ron was sitting in the armchair nearest the fire, wrapped in a blanket someone had put around his shoulders and looking like someone who'd been awake all night and had been through a significant amount of emotion and had arrived at a particular kind of desperate composure on the other side of it. He looked up when Harry came in. "She's fine," Ron said immediately. "I know she's fine. Magically induced sleep, they explained it, she's not, she's okay." He swallowed. When they came last night and she wasn't," Harry sat down across from him. "I know," he said. "I know you'll get her," Ron said. "I know that. That's not," he looked at his hands. "It's the not knowing. All night not knowing where she was." "I'm going to go get her," Harry said. "Right now. 2 hours early." Ron looked at him. "The task doesn't start until, she's my responsibility," Harry said. "I'm not going to wait 2 hours making small talk while Hermione is on the lake floor." He went to get changed. The morning was dark and cold, pre-dawn February, with the lake a flat black mirror under a sky that was just beginning to consider the possibility of light at its eastern edge. Harry stood at the lake's edge in his swimming clothes with his wand and a small supply of gillyweed that Neville had produced, silently and urgently, from his personal supply 30 minutes earlier, pressing it into Harry's hand with the solemn intensity of someone fulfilling an important mission. He'd almost used the gillyweed in the autumn while practicing. He didn't use it now. He stood at the water's edge and looked at the lake, and the lake looked back in the way it always had, enormous, patient, something alive in its depths that was older than the castle that stood behind him. He thought about the horntail. About the language they'd both understood without knowing its name. About fire reading fire, and old things recognizing other old things across the distance of centuries and difference. He thought about Hermione on the lake floor, sleeping, trusting him in the specific profound way she trusted him, which was the way you trust someone when you've watched them become exactly what the situation requires one crucial moment after another. He held out his hand. Not the gillyweed. Just his hand. The gold flame appeared in his palm. But this time it was different, this time he let it speak for itself, let it run at its full voice rather than the careful whisper he'd been maintaining in public, and the flame in his palm was not small. It was not contained. It rose to 6 inches in the grey morning air, warm and brilliant, and it cast light across the water. The lake moved. Not a wave, a response. The surface of the water shifted in a pattern that had no meteorological explanation, a slow purposeful movement that originated from the center and moved outward, the way ripples move from a thrown stone in reverse, moving toward him rather than away, and where the movement reached the shore the water went gold-lit, briefly, as though the fire in his hand had a reflection that reached further than physics accounted for. Something broke the surface. A merperson, not like the nearly human figures in the Black Lake pictures Harry had seen, but fully merfolk, silver-scaled and long-limbed, with eyes the color of deep water and the particular authority of someone who swam in their own medium and knew it. Harry thought she, though he wasn't certain, rose to the surface and looked at him with those watercolored eyes and spoke in the merfolk language, which above the surface was the high, screaming sound he'd heard from the egg. He understood every word. "You called early," she said. "Before the task." "My hostage is Hermione Granger," Harry said, and he spoke aloud and let the fire carry whatever needed to carry, trusting the thing that had worked with the horntail to work here too. "She matters to me. I'd like to bring her up now, before the hour, if that's acceptable to you and your people." The merperson looked at him for a long, considering moment. Her eyes went to the flame in his hand. Then back to his face. "You are the one," she said. "The old ones told us. 3 years ago we felt something wake in the water. We didn't know what it was. Now you do," Harry said. She was silent for a moment, and in the silence the lake around her moved in the same purposeful way, deep currents responding to something. "Your hostage is safe," she said. "Bring her up. We release her to you freely, you don't have to retrieve by swimming. This," she looked at the water, at the gold light running beneath the surface like something waking, "this is enough. More than enough." The water lit from below. Hermione rose. Not dramatically, gently, with the unhurried care of a medium releasing something precious. She came up through the water in the lake's grip, still sleeping, her hair spread around her, and the lake delivered her to the shore with the careful precision of something that had been trusted with her and was returning her intact. She settled onto the bank and the water drew back and the lake was simply the lake again, winter-dark and enormous and patient. Harry knelt beside Hermione and put his hand on her shoulder. "Hermione," he said. She woke. Not slowly, completely, the way she woke from most sleeps, fully present the moment her eyes opened, as though she'd been waiting on the other side of sleep for the right moment to come back through. She looked up at him. Looked at the lake. Looked at the sky that was now pale with early light. "You're early," she said. "You're surprised," Harry said. "No," she said, and sat up, and shook water from her hair with the pragmatic efficiency of someone who has been through worse than wet, and looked at him. "Are you all right?" "I should be asking, I was asleep," she said. "I'm fine. Are you all right?" Harry looked at her. "Yes," he said. "I'm fine." He paused. "The lake released you." She stared at him. "The lake released, the merfolk?" I asked. "They said yes." Hermione looked at the water, which was perfectly still and ordinary now, and then back at him with the expression that meant she was simultaneously processing what had happened and composing a very detailed series of follow-up questions. "You spoke to them?" "Yes." "In Mermish?" "In something," Harry said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the specific voice she used when something had moved her and she was being precise about it rather than sentimental, "The egg said they'd taken what you'd sorely miss." She looked at him steadily. "They chose me." "Yes," Harry said. She absorbed this. Something moved in her face that was genuine and unguarded and deeply personal, the feeling of someone who has been told, in the most concrete possible language, what they mean to someone. She looked at the lake again. Then she said, briskly, pulling herself to her feet, "Right. The task still starts in 2 hours and the other champions still need to go in, and you need to be at the shore when it officially begins," and, she stopped and looked at him. "Thank you." "Of course," Harry said. "I mean it." "I know," Harry said. "So do I." They walked back to the castle together in the early morning light, and behind them the lake was still and secret and its own ancient self, and somewhere in its depths something moved in a slow, satisfied circle, old and aware and briefly very warm. The task officially began at 9, with the school assembled on the banks and the champions standing at the water's edge and the judges at their table on a temporary platform over the water. Harry stood in the cold February morning in his swimming clothes and watched the merfolk officials mark the starting line in the water, and thought about what was waiting down there, or rather, what wasn't, because Hermione was already standing in the crowd wrapped in Hermione's coat and Neville's spare scarf and looking fully alert. Ron, beside her, had the expression of someone who had cried with relief and was now being extremely stoic about having done so. Fleur was on Harry's right at the water's edge. She looked at him with a sidelong glance, and something in her expression said she'd already been told, probably by Evangeline, what had happened at the lake's edge an hour ago. "You went early," she said. "I wasn't going to wait," he said. "No," she said. "I know." She paused. "I used a bubblehead charm." "Practical," Harry said. "Yes." She looked at the water. I asked someone about my hostage. Last night. To make sure she was comfortable." She paused. "Gabrielle." Harry looked at her. Fleur's younger sister. He knew from Hermione's background research that Gabrielle was 8, a half-Veela child of considerable force of personality, the apple of Fleur's eye in the way that younger siblings are when you die for them without a second thought. "She's down there," Harry said. "Yes." Her voice was steady and professional, and underneath it was the thing she told him at the boathouse: being so careful you don't move in time was worse than moving. "I will get her." "I know you will," Harry said, without qualification. She looked at him with those grey eyes that were doing nothing complicated and everything personal at once. "Last night," she said, "when I found out it was Gabrielle," she stopped. "Reset. I thought about what you said. About knowing what you're defending. And how it makes things clear." She paused. "You were right." "The clarity or the certainty?" Harry asked. "Both," she said. "Both the same thing, really." She turned back to the water. "When this is over," she said, in a different tone, quieter, more private, "I want to talk. Not about the tournament or the law or any of it." She paused. "About Paris. I want to tell you about Paris in the summer. And I want to," she stopped herself. "I have things I want to say." Harry looked at her profile in the winter morning light, the sharp beauty of her, the precision of her, the thing underneath both of those that had been revealing itself piece by piece since the boathouse and was now very nearly fully visible. "I'll hold you to that," he said. She turned to look at him, and the expression on her face was the fully open one, the one with no architecture at all, and it was extraordinary. "Good," she said. The cannon fired. Fleur went in cleanly, the bubblehead charm already active, barely a splash. Crumb went in after. He'd done something to himself, a partial transfiguration that gave him a shark's head, which Hermione would later describe as creative if inadvisable. Cedric had already gone in 30 seconds before the official signal, which was technically a false start, but nobody called it because it was Cedric and the judges were generous. Harry stood at the water's edge. He felt the lake waiting. He felt the thing in his blood that had spoken to the Horntail and the Merfolk, and the fire in Evangeline's trace loom and the wards running through the Beauxbatons wing like warm roots in stone, the thing that was native to him, that had always been native to him, that he'd simply not had the right name for until November. He stepped into the water. And then the Death Eater made his move. Harry felt it before he heard it, a wrongness in the air behind him, a specific cold purposefulness that he'd learned to recognize from standing in the greenhouse passage with Moody, the signature of someone on a mission with harm at its center. He turned. The stunner hit the ground 6 inches from his feet and scattered gravel. On the bank, chaos erupted, students scattering, teachers shouting, the judge's platform rocking as someone spun toward the source of the curse. Harry was already moving, out of the water and back onto the bank in 2 steps, because the target hadn't been the water, the target had been him at the water's edge, and whoever this was had either planned this moment specifically for the task or had been waiting and finally found their window. He was at the edge of the bank with his wand out before most people had registered what had happened. The Death Eater was not hiding. He was standing on the bank 40 feet away, his mask off, which was a statement, Harry realized immediately, a deliberate statement, and he was a man Harry recognized from Snape's parchment, from the name written and folded on a corner of a desk in the dungeons. A man named Cassius Selwyn, who was 40 years old and had 3 prior convictions under the last regime and a specific grievance that Snape had documented in careful detail. Selwyn was a man whose family had Veela ancestry, old ancestry, going back 4 generations, carefully hidden and carefully denied through decades of blood purity ideology that had required its concealment to be constant and complete. A man who had spent his adult life in a movement that would have destroyed him had it known what he carried. A man who had, Snape's notes suggested, built his entire identity on the denial of what he was. And now the Emperor had been declared. And the declaration meant that what Selwyn had hidden might surface. Might be seen. Might make everything he'd built and everything he'd chosen suddenly require a different accounting. Harry understood, in the single clear second before the next curse came, why Selwyn was here. Not on Voldemort's order, or not only on Voldemort's order. On his own necessity. The personal angle Fudge had mentioned. This was more personal than politics. He deflected the second curse without effort and put a protego around the nearest cluster of students in the same movement, the 2 actions simultaneous, because his reflexes were what they were and Moody's training had been exactly what it needed to be. Selwyn, he said, and walked toward the man without rushing, wand raised and ready and absolutely without drama. Put it down. You don't get to tell me. Selwyn's voice was cracking at the edges, the specific crack of someone operating from pure emotional necessity rather than tactical calculation. His wand hand was not steady. You don't get to come back and make everything. I know what you're carrying, Harry said, and he said it quietly, directly at Selwyn and nobody else, in the register of something private. He was still walking. 20 feet away. 15. I know what you've been hiding. I know what it cost you. Selwyn's wand hand dropped a fraction. The motion of a person who has been reached somewhere they weren't expecting to be reached. You have Veela blood, Harry said. Old enough that it's barely there, but it's there. And you've been running from it your whole life because the people you chose to stand with would have ended you for it. He was 10 feet away. I'm not your enemy. What you've been fighting is not your enemy. The thing you've been hiding is part of what I am here to protect. Don't, Selwyn said, and his voice had something in it that was not a Death Eater's voice, that was older and more broken and more human than any ideology. Don't, you don't know, I know it's been a long time, Harry said. And I know what carrying something that long does to a person. He stopped 5 feet away and looked at Selwyn directly, with the clear unguarded sight that was native to him and always had been, the reading of what was true underneath what was performed, and what he saw in Selwyn was not a Death Eater at this precise moment but a man who was exhausted all the way down. Put it down, Harry said again. Gently. The gentleness of someone who means it. The wand hit the ground. Selwyn stood with his hands at his sides and his face stripped open, and he was not weeping but he was very close to it, and Harry looked at him for a moment with complete evenness. Then the Aurors were there, 3 of them, arriving from the castle end of the bank at a sprint, and they took Selwyn efficiently and professionally, and Moody was a step behind them, his magical eye already sweeping the banks for secondary threats. Harry turned back to the lake. Dumbledore was standing on the bank between Harry and the water, and his expression was the most uncomplicated it had ever been in Harry's presence, not strategic, not managing, not balancing competing concerns. Just an old man looking at a young one with something very close to awe. The task, Harry said. Harry, Dumbledore said. The task is still running, my hostage is already recovered, but Fleur's sister is still down there and she's 8 years old. He paused. I'm going in. Dumbledore stepped aside. Harry stepped into the lake. The cold hit him and then it didn't. The water received him the way the air received him on a broomstick, with the particular welcome of a medium that recognized something familiar in what had entered it. He went under and the world changed, the way it always did, the surface disturbance sealing above his head and the deep cold silence of underwater replacing the chaos of the bank. He didn't need gillyweed. He understood that the moment the water closed over him, felt his lungs adjust in a way that had no physiological explanation, felt his body settle into the medium the way you settle into a known space, and thought, briefly and with something that was not quite amazement but was adjacent to it, of course. The lake opened around him. Gold light ran through the water from him, not visible above the surface but visible here, a warm thread of light that ran outward and was answered by the merfolk's own markers, their bioluminescent path markers shifting to accommodate him, pointing the way to the village where the hostages waited on a great stone platform, tied with weed, sleeping their enchanted sleep. He passed Crumb's shark form going the other direction. The second task gave each champion a separate route, and the Crumb shark paused and looked at him with its ancient predator's eyes and made a sound that was not language exactly but was something. Harry nodded at it. The Crumb shark moved on. He found the village in 14 minutes, which the merfolk would later tell Dumbledore was unprecedented, faster than any human swimmer by 12 minutes, and he didn't ask how he'd navigated because he knew, the lake had helped him, the same way the Horntail had helped him, the same way the atrium had helped him by clearing a path without being asked. There were 4 hostages on the platform. Ron, for Crumb. Cho Chang, for Cedric. A woman Harry didn't recognize, for him, because Hermione had already been brought up, which the merfolk had noted in their records and the judges would later confirm counted as a valid retrieval. And Gabrielle. Gabrielle Delacour was 8 years old and small, her silver blonde hair drifting around her in the water with the absolute uncanny beauty of a half Veela even in unconsciousness, and even sleeping her face had Fleur's particular quality, the precision of it, the completeness. Harry looked at her for a moment. Then he untied her and took her up. He broke the surface with Gabrielle in one arm, and the cold February air hit him, and the crowd erupted in the enormous total way crowds erupt when something that has been building releases all at once. He swam to the bank with one arm and the lake assisted, the water carrying him faster than it should have, and hands reached down to take Gabrielle and he pulled himself out onto the bank. Fleur was there. She'd come out of the water 3 minutes earlier, she'd found Gabrielle's position but encountered Grindylows on the way back and lost time, and she'd surfaced without her sister, and Harry had seen her face from across the water before he'd gone under, the face of someone who had moved as fast as they could and it hadn't been enough. Gabrielle was in her arms now, awake and confused and slightly indignant in the way of 8-year-olds who have been treated like a package, and Fleur was making sounds against the top of her head that were French and low and completely not for anyone else. Harry stood on the bank dripping and watched, and he felt the warmth of it the way you feel something that is right, that is exactly the way things should be. Fleur looked up. She met his eyes over Gabrielle's head, and her expression was everything she was, the full depth of it, the relief and the gratitude and the thing that had been developing since a boathouse on a November morning and had arrived, finally, in the full light of a February afternoon, present and unambiguous and completely real. She said something in French, low and private, and this time she said it looking directly at him, not under her breath, not accidentally. His French was not good. But it was better than it had been 2 months ago, because Fleur had been correcting it whenever they talked, and he'd been listening. He caught most of it. "You brought her back to me." "She was there to be brought back," he said. "I just went to get her." "Harry," Fleur said, and the way she said his name, his first name, which she hadn't used until now, always Potter, precise and arm's length, was something specific. It was the sound of a drawbridge that had been lowered completely. Gabrielle turned to look at Harry with wide silver Veela eyes that were disconcertingly direct for an 8-year-old. She said something in French. "She says," Fleur said, her voice slightly rough at the edges, "that you smell like fire." Harry looked at Gabrielle. Gabrielle looked at him with the total, unfiltered assessment of a child who has no social reason to lie. "Your sister's very brave," he told her. "She swam to the bottom of a freezing lake to find you." Gabrielle turned to Fleur with an expression of supreme sisterly satisfaction. "He likes you," she announced, in English, with the devastating clarity of a child stating the obvious. Fleur's expression was extraordinary. "Gabrielle," she said. "What?" Gabrielle said. "He does." Harry looked at the lake to give Fleur a moment. The scores were going up on the board, he hadn't paid attention to the timing, had no idea where he'd placed, genuinely didn't care. He watched the grey water settle back into its ordinary winter self and felt the warmth of what was under it, the warmth of something old and patient and briefly, wonderfully satisfied. The scores, when he registered them, were Harry 1st, 47 points. Cedric 2nd, 45. Crumb 3rd, 40. Fleur 4th, the Grindylows had taken genuine time, and she'd been docked for returning without her hostage, 32. The gap put Harry clear at the top overall. He noted it. Filed it. Moved on. The celebration that evening should have been the defining event of the day, and it was, but not in the way that celebrations usually are. The Gryffindor common room was loud and warm and full, and Harry sat in it with the warmth of friends and the clean tiredness of someone who had been in cold water and confronted a Death Eater and navigated an enchanted lake all before noon, and it felt, for the first time in as long as he could remember, completely uncomplicated. Ron had his arm around Hermione's shoulders, which was new, and both of them were carefully not acknowledging that it was new, and Harry watched this with the amused recognition of someone who had seen both of them being completely obvious about each other for 3 years and was very glad the obvious had finally become actual. "You knew," Hermione said, catching Harry's expression. "Since second year," Harry said. "Second year," Ron said, indignant. "The pixie incident," Harry said. "You caught her when she fell off the bookcase." "I was being, you turned the color of a post box and didn't let go for about 30 seconds longer than necessary," Harry said. Hermione was making a very careful effort to look at neither of them. "This is," Ron pointed at Harry. "You're different, you know. You've always been, but you're different now." "Better or worse?" Harry said. "Better," Ron said immediately, without qualification. "Like, you were always Harry. But now you're," he searched. "More Harry." He paused, apparently satisfied with this. "More completely Harry." Harry looked at his friend, this red-haired, loyal, fundamentally decent person who had sat with him through every impossible thing and would sit with him through whatever came next, not because of prophecy or destiny or the weight of ancient bloodlines but simply because that was what Ron was. "That's exactly right," he said. Ron grinned. Full and genuine and exactly what it was. Later, after the common room had thinned and the fire had settled into that late evening companionship of warm embers, Harry slipped out and walked to the courtyard. Their courtyard. He wasn't surprised to find Fleur there. She was sitting on the wall facing the lake, which was invisible in the dark but present in the way that enormous things are always present whether you can see them or not. She'd changed into dry clothes and done something with her hair, and the lamplight from the castle windows caught the silver blonde of it and turned it warm. She heard him come and turned, and she did not rearrange her expression or compose herself. She just looked at him with what she was actually feeling, which was considerable and unguarded and entirely her own. "Gabrielle wants to come back to Hogwarts," she said. "She told my mother by Fleur this evening that she wants to attend a school with a lake that is alive." "The lake is alive," Harry said. "I told her that's not how schools work." "She's probably right, though," Harry said. "About the lake." Fleur looked at him for a moment. "Then, she also told my mother about you. In considerable detail. My mother asked me," she paused. "My mother asked me what I thought." "What did you tell her?" Harry said. Fleur looked at the darkness where the lake was. "I told her that I had been wrong about a great many things since coming to Britain, and that this was one of the things I had been most wrong about." She paused. "She asked me what I meant. I said," she looked at him directly. "I said I thought I had found something real." The courtyard was quiet. The November cold had deepened into February cold, the specific bone-deep cold of Scotland in winter, and neither of them moved toward the castle. "In Paris," Harry said. "You said you wanted to tell me about Paris in summer." She looked at him with the beginning of a real smile. "I did say that." "Tell me," he said. So she told him. She told him about the Seine in August when the light fell sideways across the water in the early evening and the whole city went gold. She told him about the market near her grandmother's apartment where they sold lavender and old books and occasionally, tucked between the Muggle stalls, things that had no business being there but were anyway. She told him about the way Evangeline cooked on Sunday mornings and the smell of it coming through the whole apartment and Gabrielle running to the kitchen and the particular quality of a Sunday morning in a family that was loud and close and completely itself. She told him in French and English mixed together, the way she talked when she wasn't performing, and Harry listened with the complete attention he gave things that mattered. When she had finished, she said, "Your turn." He thought about it. About what he'd tell her. The Desleys were not a story for tonight, that was a heavier conversation for a different time. He thought about what he could give her that was equally honest, equally real. "I'll tell you about the first time I flew," he said. "On a broomstick. My first week at Hogwarts." "Yes," she said. "Malfoy threw Neville's Remembrall," he said, "and I went after it without thinking, and I caught it 20 feet off the ground in a dive that should have broken my neck, and when I pulled up I was level with the castle windows and I could see the whole grounds, and it was," he paused. "Every person in my life before Hogwarts told me I was nothing. Or worse than nothing. And I was sitting on a broomstick 20 feet in the air with the whole world below me and I felt," he looked at the dark where the lake was. "For the first time, I felt like myself. Like this was the shape I was supposed to be. Not the Desley's shape. Mine." Fleur was very still. "That's when I knew there was something in me that was real," Harry said. "Even if I didn't know what it was yet." She held his gaze for a long moment. And then she reached out and took his hand, not dramatically, not as a declaration, just simply and directly, the way she did everything when she was being completely herself, and laced her fingers through his, and looked at the dark lake. Harry looked at their joined hands. Then at the lake. Then at the sky above Scotland, which was doing something remarkable with stars. He held her hand and felt the fire in his blood run warm and steady and patient and completely his, and thought about the weigh-in ceremony in November, and Evangeline's fingers on his wrist, and the word Emperor dropping into a crowded room like a stone into water, and the ripples that had spread outward from it, through a courtroom and a lake and a castle and the accumulated weight of 300 years of waiting. He was 14 years old. He had tasks still to complete and a tournament to finish and a dark wizard running in the background of everything who was not going to simply stop running. He had a ministry that had lost a hearing and would be looking for a different angle, and a Death Eater in custody who might talk or might not, and Fudge's careful machinery still grinding even now in some ministry office somewhere. He had friends who were real and a grandmother figure who had kept a 900-year-old document and waited 30 years for someone to give it to, and a girl beside him who had come to Britain expecting to know what she'd find and had found something else entirely. He had fire in his blood that had never gone out. He had, he thought, everything he needed. Not everything he wanted, there was still the wanting for his parents and a different childhood and a world that was not complicated in the specific ways his world was complicated. He was not naive about what was coming. He knew what was at the end of the year, or something close to what was at the end of the year, and he knew it would be hard and real and consequential in ways that didn't resolve cleanly. But he was not afraid of it. That was the thing. That was what Monday had given him, or rather, what Monday had named, what had always been in him, the specific quality of a person who looked at the thing that was coming and stood to meet it, not because they had no fear but because they were made of something that did not yield. Custos ignis veri, Hermione had read from a dusty text. Guardian of true fire. He thought about what that meant, really, underneath the Latin and the history and the legal frameworks and the ancient accords. He thought about what fire was, at its most basic, not the weapon of it or the spectacle of it, but the thing itself. The thing that gave warmth. The thing that held back the cold. The thing that, once lit, did not go out unless someone deliberately extinguished it. He was the guardian of that. Not a knight. Not a king. Not a symbol or a prophecy or a scar that other people built stories around. The thing that keeps the fire going. Beside him, Fleur was watching the lake, her hand warm in his, and she said quietly, "What are you thinking about?" "Fire," he said. "Always," she said, with that rare genuine smile. "And Paris in summer," he said. "And what it's going to look like." She turned to look at him with those gray eyes that had revised and revised and revised and arrived, finally, at clarity, at a seeing that was complete and unqualified. She did not pretend not to understand what he meant. "It's very beautiful," she said. "In August. The light." "I believe you," he said. The lake moved in the darkness, slow and alive and patient, keeping whatever it kept in its deep cold depths, its creatures and its memories and its old magic and the thread of gold warmth that had run through its water this morning and would be there still, would be there for a very long time, because some fires, once given to the water, don't go out. They're just carried differently. Harry Potter, Emperor, Custos Ignis Veri, the boy who had been told he was nothing by everyone who feared him and had turned out to be something older and stranger and more complete than any of their categories could hold, sat in a stone courtyard in Scotland in February and held a girl's hand and looked at the stars and was, completely and finally and without apology, himself. The fire in his blood ran steady and warm. The night settled around him. And somewhere in the long record of things that had been waiting, a 900-year-old register turned one more page, and wrote nothing, because what was written was already complete, and what was coming had not happened yet, and between those two facts was the whole of a life being lived exactly as it was supposed to be lived. Fully. Freely. Without apology.